It's like West
1986,
225 for gifting a
a
Tier 1 friendship
1987
package to
issue of
you,
Your
Yena.
Computer,
Really
the
great
first
stuff.
issue of ST Amiga Format in 1988, and a 1990 issue of Amiga World. Some do at least add a qualifier, such as Computer Gaming World's claim in 1982 that Pong was the first computer game of renown. Similarly as the first video game for the masses in a 1987 issue of Ahoy. So there was at least some awareness of an earlier history, but not much in the way of in-depth research. I suppose it was a different era. Google wasn't a thing, and even a trip to a local library wouldn't be much use, as video games weren't exactly well documented. So, with Pong being so prominent, it was generally accepted as an origin point. And while it does mark the popular emergence of games, there lies a long and obscure history behind it. The funny thing about Pong is that it isn't even Atari's first game, never mind the first game ever. Before Atari were Atari, they were called Syzygy Engineering, and along with manufacturer Nutting Associates, they released a game called Computer Space in 1971. Computer Space was never as popular as Pong, selling maybe 1,500 units as opposed to the tens of thousands of Pong arcade machines and the millions of subsequent clones. But one of the co-founders of Atari, Nolan Bushnell, was certainly no stranger to publicity. And in interviews during the early 1980s, he was quick to point out that Pong wasn't his first game. Some of the gaming press picked up on this, reproducing his words verbatim. Big K in 1985 cites Computer Space as the first marketed video game, which might be correct. And a 1993 Amiga Format special is proud to reveal that Pong isn't the first video game after all, instead granting that accolade to Computer Space. So for a long time, Nolan Bushnell was seen as the father of video games. But here's the thing. Computer Space wasn't exactly original. It was based on an earlier game that Bushnell had played during his time at Stanford University. Again, something he freely admitted. That game was called
C
Space
Sharp
War,
is C++.
and it first emerged in the computing labs at MIT by 1962. Unlike Computer Space, it wasn't an arcade machine. It was never intended for commercial release. It simply wasn't a viable option. It ran on an expensive minicomputer, the PDB-1, which even in a basic configuration sold for $120,000 in the 1960s. So it was a purely academic exercise, but one that was surprisingly popular on campus, at least amongst those with access to the computing lab. The July 1971 issue of Analog Science Fiction Science Fact describes it as the first true space-age game. And they aren't wrong. This was just 2 years after the moon landings. This is one of very few accounts that detail an interactive game before video games had a meaningful impact on popular culture. It's interesting to see how they treat Space War as a unique thing, rather than as part of something else. Space War isn't seen as a video game. Space War is just Space War. Over its life, the game spread from institution to institution and became reasonably well known within the right community. But it wasn't until the early 1980s that the game started to reach wider public attention. In 1981, one of the game's co-creators, Martin Gratz, wrote an article for Creative Computing, a fairly comprehensive 8-page history of its development and operation. However, it was a 1984 book that did the most to bring Space War to wider public attention. Stephen Levy's Hackers, Heroes of the Computer Revolution, detailed some of the exploits of MIT engineers over the last couple of decades, with a whole chapter dedicated to Space War. So as time went on and more people learned about the game, it gained some recognition as the first computer game. Byte magazine described it as such in 1990. This reign would be short-lived, however, as another, earlier game came to light soon after. A game from 1958 called Tennis for Two. Tennis for Two was the creation of a man named William Higginbotham, an American nuclear physicist. While working at the Brookhaven National Laboratory, he created a game designed to show off the lab's instrumentation at their annual exposition. Tennis for Two was shown to the public in 1958, and and once again in 1959, before being dismantled and largely forgotten about. Until 1982 at least, a mention of the game appears in an issue of Creative Computing, an article titled, "Who Really Invented the Video Game?" It details the hardware used, an analog computer with a 5-inch oscilloscope display, and goes on to describe the gameplay.
It's actually 10
It was a tennis game, not dissimilar to Pong, with a ball following a realistic trajectory as each player hits it back and forth. It was quite a convincing simulation, but considering it was using hardware designed to calculate the trajectory of ballistic missiles, that might not be too surprising. Despite Higginbotham's subsequent radio interview with NPR in '83, the revelation of a video game that dated to as early as 1958 passed most people by. Most were still content in thinking that Pong was the origin. In 1993, author Ira Flatow sought to correct this as part of his book. They All Left, a collection of invention stories from throughout history. The final chapter is all about Tennis for Two. Flatow had worked at NPR, so it's likely he's familiar with Tennis for Two through Higginbotham's interview in 1983. Sadly, William Higginbotham died in 1994, but his obituaries detailed his achievements, including his game. And subsequently, Tennis for Two became well known. The new answer to the question of what was the first video game? Perfectly satisfactory.
Tennis for Two.
Looks like Pong, dates to 1958. That can't be much earlier, can that? Today, if you look at Wikipedia's article on the early history of video games, you'll see mention of a 1947 invention. The cathode ray tube amusement device. Sounds like a delightfully archaic term for video games. And we can verify its existence in the patent record. Number 2455992. Submitted on the 25th of January 1947 and granted on the 14th of December 1948. Its impact must have been limited.
How's it going?
It's only recently come to prominence.
That guy is the
roughly
best
as
of
long as the
broski.
existence of Wikipedia. This re-emergence can be traced to Jed Margolin's 2001 article, The Secret Life of Vector Generators. Margolin was an Atari engineer familiar with the golden era of arcade games, and crucially, is the named inventor on a number of patents relevant to early video game hardware. This 1947 patent first came to light in a lawsuit. Magnavox versus Bally, circa 1976. The amusement device was cited as prior art in Bally's defense. So someone working on Bally's behalf must have done the necessary legwork to uncover this. After all, there was a strong incentive. Magnavox held a key patent on video games that earned them $100 million over its lifetime. And, according to the man behind that patent, Ralph Baer,
Not Ralph Baer.
games were his invention. The man had an interesting career. He fled Nazi Germany in 1938, was drafted into World War II in 1943, and, courtesy of the GI Bill, attained the first ever BSc in television engineering in 1949. By 1961, he ended up at Sanders Associates, a defense contractor that specialized in electronic systems. In September 1966, Baer laid out his ideas for an interactive television game, and work began on a series of prototypes. These prototypes culminated in the brown box design in 1968, so named for its wood grain effect vinyl covering. This device connected to any standard television and could play a variety of games, including a tennis game that has a startling similarity to Pong, seen here in a 1969 demonstration.
Last time was 30...
This was the system that would eventually be licensed and
36
sold
days,
as the Magnavox
37
Odyssey
days?
in 1972, the very first home video game system. Everything at Sanders was remarkably well documented, perhaps because of their work for the military, but this means there's a large body of dated documentation to accompany Baer's invention. Additionally, unlike Tennis for Two at Brookhaven National Laboratory and Space War at MIT, Sanders was a commercial entity. They existed for profit and were at liberty to patent their innovations. And patent they did, with Bear's work submitted in 1968, amended while pending in 1971, and granted in 1973. US patent number 3728480. A second was filed in 69, granted in 72, and reissued in 75. Reissue 28507. Collectively, the 480 and 507 patents gave Sanders and licensee Magnavox a very strong legal right to fundamental concepts behind early video games. A right which they exploited. Magnavox filed lawsuits against Atari, Bally Midway, Chicago Coin, Mattel, Activision, and won all of them, garnering substantial licensing fees. Nintendo preemptively sued Magnavox for the US launch of the NES in 1985 in an effort to overturn these patents. They lost as well. Patents are strong, and Magnavox had precedence. Despite the legal victories, Bear was regarded as something of an also-ran in the early video game stakes. But he gained quite some recognition following the 2004 award of the National Medal of Technology. His time spent forgotten is evident in the frustrated tone of his 2005 book, Video Games in the Beginning. He lays his claim to the industry's genesis, and the disdain for Nolan Bushnell and Atari's later success is particularly apparent. He's also very dismissive of any precursors. He writes off Space War as impractical, and Tennis for Two as akin to fiddling with an oscilloscope. But it's hard to blame him. He was definitely a pioneer. Ralph Baer died in 2014 at the age of 92. His accomplishments in video games eulogized. Whether or not he invented video games, he can lay legitimate claim to the first home video game. But I feel there's more to video games than just consoles. To complicate things further, while Tennis for Two and the 1947 patent steal the limelight, anything between these milestones falls through the cracks. Take OXO, for instance, a 1952 game developed for the EDSAC, an early digital computer. It's a simple game of noughts and crosses, or tic-tac-toe if you prefer.
Noughts and
Its display
crosses
uses a cathode ray tube. In fact, the computer has 3 of them
Noughts
used to
and
indicate program and
crosses.
system status. The middle tube is normally used to display
got
parts of
shoe boobs,
memory
I did earlier,
in a
man.
35 by 16 dot matrix. But rather than store game state in binary, OXO exploited the visual memory display to create a game board, filling up with X's and O's as the game is played. Then there's Nimrod, part of the 1951 Festival of Britain. A dedicated machine designed to play the game of Nim faster than thought. Played on a bank of lights, the player and AI taking turns to remove them, attempting to leave the last light for their opponent. Bertie the Brain was another computing demonstration in the summer of 1950 at the Canadian National Exhibition. Similar to the later OXO, Bertie was a computer AI designed to play a game of tic-tac-toe on a display illuminated by an array of light bulbs. So, we have a number of candidates for the first ever game, and we've painted a picture of our understanding over the last few decades.
Did you know in I Am Legend,
Paradoxically,
Will Smith is actually the
further
villain?
you go back, the more recent the consensus of the first ever video game. And everything seems to converge
maybe,
on Pong.
man.
As video gaming developed, so too did the appreciation of its history. And as more scrutiny was given to the limits of popular memory, the origin was pushed farther back. First to Space War, then Tennis for Two. The principal catalyst for this interest, at least at first, were the Magnavox lawsuits, with a very strong financial incentive for someone to overturn these key patents. But as we shed more light on the past, another paradox emerges. The more we uncover, the less certain we become. So, we have a problem. There's no shortage of candidates for the title of first video game, but some of them feel like they might not qualify. To land at a satisfactory answer to our original question, we must first answer another. What is a video game? I told you it was tricky. But a definitive conclusion needs a concrete definition. Defining the video game is hard, but determining one less so. The duck test is applicable here, i.e., if it looks like a video game and plays like a video game, then we can probably call it a video game. So, Pong, video game. Asteroids, video game. Space Invaders, video game. However, with the earliest examples of games, we start to approach the edge of the definition. So we need to determine a hard delineation between video game and not video game. The way I see it, there are two essential elements. The first is a video display of some kind, and the second is interaction for the purpose of entertainment, i.e., a game. We'll start with the video part. The word comes from the Latin video, meaning I see.
Video.
Think of it as a counterpart to audio, I hear. However, its modern meaning is slightly more specific. It has the implication of an electronic signal driving a visual display, distinct from film, which is projected. This normally means television, but it can also include computer monitors, oscilloscopes, and liquid crystal arrays. Any display capable of receiving a signal and producing an image. For this reason, I think we can exclude games that use indicator lamps. These tend to be electronically integrated into the logic circuit rather than driven by a separate signal. Now, you could argue that any display is just an array of lights and that there need not be a minimum array size. And I agree that we don't need to stipulate a minimum resolution, but on the other hand, a single light bulb doesn't constitute a video display. The key difference lies in the generation of a video signal. Video signals come in a variety of forms, but they are generally low voltage, high frequency, and transmissible between two different electronic circuits.
That is so true.
They often have a certain timing, either a particular synchronization frequency or a separate clock, accompanied with some form of image signal. I don't think we need to stipulate any particular technical format, but for our definition of video game, we are going to need at least some kind of video signal. This means that neither Bertie the Brain nor Nimrod qualify. Their banks of light bulbs don't meet our video signal requirement. Next, consider the Nintendo Game Boy. This particular breed of handheld LCD game presents another boundary. Compare the earlier Game & Watch. I would consider this just an electronic game, but the Game Boy a bona fide handheld video game. So what's the distinction? I think both are borderline, but there is a key difference in the way the LCD displays are driven. The Game & Watch is essentially running on the same type of display as a calculator. An active liquid crystal display with a quad multiplexed LCD driver. The only difference is that the LCD segments represent gameplay elements instead of numerical digits. The Game Boy, however, has a considerably more complex screen. At 160 pixels across and 144 pixels tall, there are over 20,000 segments to control.
I'm kind of a
each
Game Boy
with
expert.
4 levels of brightness. Because of this, the signals sent to the display resemble a conventional video signal. There are horizontal and vertical sync lines, along with a 2-bit digital data channel. It's not NTSC compliant, but it could definitely be described as a video signal. And, in fact, hardware such as the Super Game Boy can adapt them for use on a standard television.
Super Game Boy!
If there was any doubt to the distinction, the language used on their respective patents is another clear indicator. The Game & Watch is described as an electronic toy having a game function, whereas the Game Boy is a compact handheld video game system. So, we can draw a line between the two, and we've established that a cathode ray tube is a nice to have, but not an absolute necessity. However, even when dealing with CRT displays, there are some that make the argument that not everything qualifies. Ralph Baer, for instance, is quite specific with his definition. Baer states that to be considered a true video game, the device on which it is played must generate a raster signal capable of being displayed on a domestic television set. Fair enough, I suppose, and most games do fit this definition. But it's a little too strict for my taste. Technically, it would exclude many early computer games that targeted monitors rather than televisions. But most crucially, it excludes every single vector game. While they're extinct today, vector games were an important part of the golden arcade era, including Asteroids, Star Castle, the Vectrex console, and the 1983 Star Wars arcade game. There are dozens of examples, and I can't think of a good reason to discard them. Their graphics aren't painted by a raster signal, but they are still painted by a signal, a 2-axis XY signal that directly controls the electron beam's deflection. My gut says Asteroids is a video game, and so our definition of video game has to include vector displays.
Right.
But this has significant meaning when it comes to answering the question.
This makes a lot of sense.
By keeping our definition broad enough to include
Totally
vector
agree.
video, we have to also include
And
some
I
of the
totally
earliest
understand
candidates.
it also.
Space War had vector graphics. Tennis for Two had vector graphics. The 1947 patent would have used vector graphics. So we can't yet exclude any of them. But now we have a reasonably good sense of what the term video means, we can move on to the other essential aspect: the game. We don't need to be too strict with this definition. When we say game, what we really mean is interactive entertainment. But what our definition needs to do is separate video games from something like television itself. For instance, watching television is definitely entertainment, and to some extent it is interactive. Changing channels or simply powering the device on qualifies as interaction. The critical difference lies with the generation of the video signal. In television, these are broadcast remotely, and the signal itself cannot be changed, only switched between. With a video game, the signal is generated locally, and crucially, the player's input has a direct influence on the signal generated. The game responds to the player through the medium of video. There are some recent exceptions to local signal generation. Services such as OnLive or Google Stadia stream video over the internet. But in these cases, the player still controls the signal, albeit through an additional network layer. So, a video game must give some degree of control over the video signal itself to be considered sufficiently interactive. Next, consider a DVD menu. Technically, the video signal is altered in response to user input. Options are highlighted, and the menus are navigable in a non-linear way. All of the elements necessary for a video game are present. In fact, some DVDs even feature games, and these arguably qualify as video games. That said, however, a typical DVD menu definitely isn't a video game. So what's the difference? Put it this way: how do we separate non-entertainment software from games? Consider a spreadsheet used for managing resources versus a resource management simulator. Their interfaces might be very similar, and the mode of operation nearly identical. The key difference is intent. A spreadsheet for resource management is created to manage resources. And there are some people who find that entertaining, but entertainment is not the primary purpose. The simulator, on the other hand, can be primarily intended for entertainment. Some simulators aren't. They might be for training purposes, such as a military flight simulator. But if it's a commercial product that you can play on a home computer, then there's a good chance you can consider it a video game. The same applies to DVD menus. While they are interactive and do serve to deliver entertainment, their interaction is not intended to be intrinsically entertaining. So, intent is very important. Not only must interaction be present, but the principal intended purpose of that interaction must be some form of entertainment. So, we've covered the broad strokes, but there are some additional points of contention that might shape our final definition. For instance, does a video game need to be implemented to be considered? Is a concept enough? The 1947 CRT amusement device is only known to exist as a patent. Some sources claim prototypes were built, but there's no evidence of this. The inventors, Thomas T. Goldsmith Jr. and Nestle Rayman, did work for an established manufacturer of television equipment, Dumont Laboratories, so it's not unreasonable to assume that they had the means to manufacture such a device. But given the absence of any marketed product and the lack of any further development, it seems the project wasn't deemed viable. Now, it seems fairly logical to insist that the first ever game actually existed, but in a sea of prototypes and experiments, it's less clear-cut than I'd like. I think prototypes should still count, but our definition should only include games with evidence of a practical implementation. So is that enough to discount the 1947 device? I think it depends on how strict you are with the definition of evidence. A patent might be enough. They describe the invention in detail and are subject to scrutiny before being granted. But where the 1947 device falls flat, however, is with the gameplay itself. While it does generate a video signal that is directly controlled by the player, the game relies on other elements, physical targets on the face of the display. Without these, you're left with a triggered signal generator with an oscilloscope display. A neat novelty, but I do think this puts the 1947 device in the realm of electromechanical games, rather than that of true video games. Consider a pinball machine. Modern examples can be quite advanced, even incorporating games played on a video display. But I don't think anyone would make the argument that a modern pinball table is a video game. The core gameplay is the mechanical ball and flippers. The video display is accessory to that. Conversely, it's possible for a video game to have accessory elements. Think of an arcade game's coin box, marquee lights, etc. An arcade cabinet has more than just a video display going on, but that's not a reason for exclusion, as the primary game can be played solely through the video display. Whereas pinball relies on the mechanical elements for complete function. So, the 1947 device might be the first use of a CRT for the purpose of interactive entertainment, but its use of mechanical elements as a core part of the game means it isn't a true video game. It's an electromechanical game with a video element, and this means it doesn't qualify under our definition. Our game has to be playable solely through the use of the video display. Accessory indicators or electronics aren't reason for exclusion, but in terms of visual output, the game has to be playable by the video signal alone. And so, that leaves us with a fairly robust definition, one that consists of 5 points. Firstly, a video game must exist. It must involve some kind of video signal. This signal should be in some way interactive, and the principal intended purpose of this interactivity should be entertainment. Finally, the game should be centered on and fully playable through the use of the video displays. If a candidate meets these 5 requirements, then I think we can consider it a video game. So we have our definition. The only thing left to do is apply it. So the candidates that remain are Pong, Computer Space, Bear's Brown Box, Space War, Tennis for Two, and OXO. All of these are documented to exist, so there's no question of practical implementation for any of them, least of all Pong. In terms of video signal, Pong, Computer Space, and the Brown Box generate a raster signal suitable for an NTSC television, whereas Space War, Tennis for Two, and OXO generate an XY signal for display on an oscilloscope or vector monitor. OXO's display is a little contentious. While it did use a cathode ray tube and it was driven by a signal, the display wasn't really intended to be a graphical one. In fact, the cathode ray tube wasn't chosen because of its display capability at all. In the early days, CRTs were used for storage. One implementation was called the Williams-Kilburn tube, and it relied on a curious side effect of energized phosphors. Once lit by the scanning electron beam, a charge would persist for a fraction of a second. This secondary emission could be sensed, and the phosphor recharged on the next scan, meaning you could store an array of a couple of thousand bits indefinitely. This was presented on the face of the display as a grid of illuminated dots, the electron beam scanning rows in a fairly similar way to a raster display. However, a sensor sheet on the face of the tube did cover up most of the visible pattern, making this arrangement less than ideal for use as a display. But quite often, a second tube would be connected in parallel without the obstruction. EDSAC, the machine that ran OXO, didn't use a Williams tube for storage. It used mercury delay line memory instead. But the contents of this memory were displayed on a diagnostic CRT in the same manner. So, while it was never really intended to be used for graphics, the fact is, it was, and so, it still qualifies. Back to the candidates. In terms of interactivity, I think most here count. Again, the only possible exception is OXO.
What's happening?
Because of the limitations of the display, OXO is considerably less dynamic than the other examples, with the display only updating when a move is made. That said, the display does change in response to player input, so it is interactive, if not exciting. Intent is the fourth criterion, and it's fairly clear that Pong, Computer Space, and Bear's Brown Box were all intended for entertainment. That was their ultimate commercial purpose. Spacewar was definitely a diversionary pursuit, and is frequently described as a game. Tennis for Two was an exhibit intended for public display, and it may have had an ulterior motive to kindle an interest in science, but the prime appeal was in the playing. Now, OXO. OXO was the product of study at Cambridge University, a practical proof as part of a thesis. If we take it as part of a PhD, the work is purely academic. But I think it's fairer to judge it on its own merits. As a piece of software, it stands alone as what could easily be described as a computer game. So while entertainment isn't the purpose of implementation, it was the purpose of playing. So the final test. Can the game be played with no other visual output than the video display? Pong and Computer Space qualify without question. They are undoubtedly video games. Few would argue otherwise. You could say that the Brown Box's use of screen overlays for some of its games disqualifies it on this point. And there is some merit to this in cases where the plastic overlay is absolutely necessary to play. But for most of the games, it's not. Just an accessory. And the basic tennis game doesn't have an overlay at all. So, the Brown Box gets a pass. It's a video game. Spacewar ran on the PDP-1, which was a modular system with a range of potential visual outputs. The CRT monitor was central to the game, but it wasn't the only output that Spacewar used. In some versions, game scores were printed. However, these aspects are secondary to the actual gameplay. So Spacewar
what the fuck is this video
is
about?
a video game. Tennis for Two is simpler. Its only output was the oscilloscope display, so it is a bona fide video game. What about OXO?
First ever video game.
Like Spacewar, it ran on a full computer system, with its CRT display,
Cool.
line printer, and banks of valves and dust blinking lights. The question is it possible to play a full game with only the video display? The answer is yes, with the caveat that you have to know what you're doing. If you memorize which number corresponds to each grid position, or at least make use of a printed reference, then it's entirely possible to play without any other output. It's clumsy and archaic. Your moves are input on a rotary telephone-style dial. But poor controls are no reason to discount it. There are plenty of video games with terrible controls.
Holy shit, this guy's
So
voice
OXO
and that mojito
is,
put me to sleep.
without doubt,
That's a wake-up call.
A computer
Cal,
game
for
played on
doing-
something which can be
Who's
described
Mojito?
as a
Is that your
video
fucking
display.
Filipino boyfriend?
Under any reasonable definition, I think that qualifies as a video game. It might even be the first.
Heyo.
However,
Sorry, I'm
sure,
dealing with a
it might be
revolution
worth
right
further
now.
investigation. A closer
got a lot on my
examination of the
table, okay?
environment that spawned OXO may turn up some other potentials. What we think of as video games really comprise multiple streams. Arcade machines, television games, electronic games, and more recently, virtual reality and mobile games, which have rapidly become a significant part of the video games industry.
I was probably taking a shower, taking
When we
a
tease
shit.
out these strands, the reason why it's so difficult to pin down
Pooping,
the
eating
first
his
video
hand,
game becomes
getting his
apparent.
hand stuck in the
Each of
pickle
these
jar,
strands has its own history
mixing up macaroni
its own
with his
progression.
hands,
and its own origin.
falling down the
If we
stairs,
look at them
falling up the
individually,
stairs, falling
the
through
picture
the
becomes
stairs.
much clearer. The first arcade video game,
Yeah, these things happen.
it's either Computer
It happened
Space
to all of
or
us,
Galaxy
okay.
Game, both from the end of 1971.
Sometimes we go missing for a little bit and nobody can find
The
us.
first television game, Ralph Baer's Brown Box. The first electronic handheld video game, it could be the Game Boy, unless you count the Atari Lynx prototypes from 1987. The first virtual reality video game, possibly played via the VPL Research iPhone in 1987, or the Virtuality from 1991, although research in head-mounted displays goes all the way back to the 1950s. And the first mobile game, Tetris,
I really enjoy a Hot
on the
Pocket
1994
right now.
Haganuk
I haven't had a Hot
MT2000.
Pocket in God knows how long.
Nokia's Snake gets an honourable mention.
Fell through the floor and ended up in the lobby. It happens.
So when we
These things
split video
happen.
gaming into
Happened
its
to my buddy
components,
Eric. There you
the
go.
question becomes much easier to answer, and the oldest strand becomes obvious. It's computing. The first video
Like the
game was
breakfast one
almost
the most.
certainly an early computer game like OXO. It's just a question of determining the earliest example that qualifies.
Microwave.
The good news
Microwaving
is computers
these-
weren't
you could be
exactly common
microwaving
in the
these boxes
1940s
again.
and 50s, and fewer still had
What's a
video
Hot
displays. In the
That
brief
is
window
so
between
true.
the invention of
What
the
is a
Williams
Hot
tube
Pocket?
circa 1946 and OXO in 1952,
Whoa.
there are 7 potential
Why did you say
machines.
that?
3 of these potential
Why did
computers
you say
were
what's a
located at
Hot
the University
Pocket?
of Manchester.
Why does that?
where the
Why do I
Williams
feel like I
tube was
had that on my
developed.
like a somebody?
The first was the Manchester Baby,
Oh, no.
operational in
I'm
1948. A prototype which was replaced by the full-scale Manchester Mark I in 1949. This, in turn, was developed into and replaced by a commercial model, the Ferranti Mark I, operational in early 1951.
Man, that was
There were
weird.
2 other British machines.
For a second, I thought I had a noise on my
Pilot Ace at the
soundboard that was
National
what's a
Physical
Hot
Laboratory
Pocket.
in Teddington,
But
London,
I was confusing
operational
2
in
different
mid-1950,
noises. What's a burger?
and
And
EDSAC
this
at
one time,
Cambridge
some
University,
schizo guy on drugs
which
called
was
in the
first
chat
operational in
and just randomly
1949.
said Hot Pocket.
At this time,
In the
the
middle of a
Americans had
conversation.
2 machines with a video display.
Yeah, you
The
can ask
Whirlwind
me a
1,
question.
built by MIT for the US Navy,
A Hot Pocket is like
partially
this.
operational in
It's kind of like a
1949,
small
and reaching
breaded
full capacity in
thing that you put in the
1951,
oven, and there's usually like
and the
some
Standards
kind of,
Western Automatic
uh,
Computer, or SWAC.
fucking theme or
Located in Los
flavor, I guess.
Angeles.
Like they'll have pizza ones. If you Google it,
It's
you'll
impossible to
kind of
know
get the
every
idea of
program
it.
that ran
You
on
just
these
throw it in
early
the oven or the
machines.
microwave,
But most of them are fairly
and
well
yeah, it's like a
documented.
little snack, a good little decent
Access
snack.
was
It's pretty good.
exclusive, and programs were filed in a job queue. There was normally a paper trail, and there was an incentive for institutions to highlight their machine's accomplishments.
So you put them in the oven, or you would degen.
Unfortunately, this transparency
that would be the
and need to
non-degen
justify
way
the
of doing
computer's
it.
existence meant that
The
games
degen way
were
would be the
a very
microwave.
low
Really, the
priority.
microwave oven is the best way to do it. Yeah, some of them are great, some of them are terrible.
Starting with the SWAC, a commercial machine, we can see most applications were either pure mathematics or scientific in nature, such as searching for prime numbers, developing climatological models, The
But
X-ray
a degen
analysis
waits 60
of
minutes to
vitamin
make a
B12.
hot pot. Yeah, what kind of exactly? That's like the
Processing
least
time was
degen
split
thing
between
ever.
the Institute for Numerical Analysis.
Tanner, you have this
and other
backwards. The
government
degen
agencies.
would put it in the microwave because he
It's
didn't want it
very
to taste
unlikely
good.
that there were any games made for the SWAC.
Did they go soggy in the microwave? No, they just don't
Next,
cook as well.
the Whirlwind 1 was
Microwave
part
oven
academic,
is kind
part
of the best
military.
way to do it because it's like
It
what
was
20
intended
minutes
to
in
be
there?
used as a
It's not
flight
that long.
simulator. Not a graphical one, but as something that
Or
could
the
simulate
ultimate degen way
aerodynamics
would be
and
to
control
just
flight
eat them
instrumentation.
raw, just to eat
In
them
addition,
frozen.
it was used for industrial process control, air traffic control,
I'm going to
and to
post more
demonstrate the
documentaries
potential
so
of
you
computerized air
brains can learn
defense.
more. I'm going to tell you something crazy,
However,
but
half of the computing
this-
time available
you're not gonna
was
learn
allotted
very
to
much from a
MIT
YouTube
for
essay, my
engineering
friend.
and scientific calculations. And here, there is evidence for slightly
please God
less
don't post
serious
another
use.
useless video game facts documentary.
Whirlwind's
True.
capabilities were quite
True.
remarkable for the time,
So true.
with a generously sized
But everybody's
CRT
like,
display
Dune,
capable
talk,
of
Dune,
real-time
talk. So I'm
graphics.
getting attention. Maybe you should post another one. I let them get
It was
room
demonstrated
temp, suck
live
out the
on
insides,
American
and throw away the
television in
crust. Yeah, you don't even put
1951
them in the
in a
microwave
Christmas
or in the
episode
freezer or
of See It
wherever. You just
Now.
gotta keep them out. That's
It
very
even played a
DJ.
rendition of Jingle Bells. Later, in a 1953
I
film,
broke my ween from
Making
overuse.
Electrons Count,
I don't think
we can
you
see
broke
Whirlwind
it, but
demonstrating a
it
bouncing
can
ball
get raw
program.
sometimes if you do stuff.
It's
like
the
that.
real-time calculation of 3 differential equations, but in practice,
You
the
gotta be careful
CRT
when you're
traces a
doing this.
convincing trajectory of a ball.
How many
This
times
demo
have I
dates
told
to
you
as
guys
early
to
as
be careful with your
1949,
penis?
but it doesn't count as a video game due to a lack of
Dude, have you
interactivity.
tried Tim Tams? I have not.
However,
I don't know.
some
I don't know
sources
what that
claim
is.
that there
That
was a
sounds like
version
something
circa late
Australian, though, so let's
1950
see.
to 1951 that did have
Tim
a degree of
Tams. I googled
interactivity,
it, and
with the
it's
player
just
able to
chocolate.
adjust the ball trajectory
I have not
in
tried
order to
this.
make it drop through the hole.
Who is it?
Unfortunately,
Wait, are these-
there's
what's in
no
the middle?
evidence of this. The claims are anecdotal,
Tim
undated,
Tams is a brand of chocolate biscuit
might be
introduced by the
misremembered.
Australian Biscuit Company.
so we
Arnott's.
must presume that the Whirlwind's
Arnott's
bouncing
or
ball
Arnott's?
was a non-interactive demo.
It consists of 2
And not a game.
malted. I don't like malted stuff.
Next,
Light
the
hard
EDSAC
chocolate,
at
cream
Cambridge,
filling and coated in a
which we
thin
already
layer-
know played
thin
host to
layer of
OXO,
textured chocolate.
but was far more frequently used for scientific
What's my
purposes.
favorite Girl Scout cookie?
Atomic wave functions, astronomical equations of
Samoas.
motion,
That's kind of really
crystallography,
the only
and the
answer.
structure of myoglobin,
You have any other
and
favorite?
economic modelling.
You're actually just
So
like,
much more
not
than a
just
simple
like
game of
a-
noughts and crosses, but
I don't even-
OXO is
like
what
a
we're
fucking
interested in.
Idiot, I guess. I don't really know.
Although I should mention, OXO is not the original name of
That's
AS
like
Douglas's
really not
program.
even a question, honestly.
He referred to it as a game of noughts and crosses.
All
in
the
his
other cookies are
1954
things that you can
thesis.
get.
The OXO appellation seems to be a product
like
of a preservation effort. by the
Literally
EDSAC
fucking
replica
things that
project.
you can just get in
While
a trash
Douglas
can
didn't
at the
give an
grocery store.
exact date for the program's creation,
Yeah, Thin Mints.
he did
What
specify
a
that it
horrible
ran
pick. If you're gonna get
circa
Girl Scout
1950.
Man, this is such a good video.
pick-
So, for the
Thin Mints?
purpose of primordiality, we must assume the worst. The earliest date that we
Seriously?
can be sure of
You
is
pick,
the end
why
of
don't you just go eat a
1952.
fucking York mint at that point?
If we wanted to be really cynical,
What?
we could take the date that Douglas submitted his thesis, March 1953. In either case,
best Girl
this
Scout
means that
cookie go.
OXO, or noughts and crosses, remains the prime candidate. But was there anything else done
good
with the
video.
EDSAC that could take the crown?
Hello?
Hello?
It turns
Best
out
Girl
there
Scout
is a
cookie
whisper
go.
of another game,
Best who?
tested in the thesis
Girl
of
Scout
Stanley
cookie.
Gill.
Oh, best. Well, they don't
was
sell those in
submitted
Canada.
in November
Oh,
1952.
you ever had any?
No, but they
That
have a
would put it ahead
knockoff
of
in
Oxo.
Canada called Girl Guide cookies.
It was a game of
Okay,
sheep
best
and
one of
goats.
those.
The
screen
ones that are
vertically divided
incredibly
by a fence with 2
wafery,
gates.
small, thin
A procession of
chocolate
sheep
mint
approach
ones.
these gates, and you must open the correct one.
Do they have
by
Samoas over
interrupting
there?
a light
I don't know what
beam
that means.
In EDSAC's tape reader.
Okay. Forgivable if you don't know what
Primitive.
that means.
Naturally.
How do I go? How do I spell that?
There are no
Samoa?
photos.
Like the
Yeah.
people?
but it
Yeah,
qualifies
exactly like
on
the
the same
people.
merits as OXO.
Uh,
does
oh,
so
these are
with an
Dad's
earlier
cookies.
verifiable date. let's
There's a
not draw
company that used to
conclusions yet.
exist called Dad's Cookies, and they made
More
cookies just
machines
like this. They
remain.
were called Dad's Rings or Dad's O's. Those are pretty good, but I would rather have the thin,
Pilot Ace,
wafery,
National
minty
Physical
cookies, though.
Laboratory in Teddington,
Alright,
London.
I didn't know it was
boasted
talking about a
strong
fucking couple of
floating point
retards
performance.
in here then.
Ideal
My
for
mom
heavy
left some at my
scientific
house, the Girl Guide
calculations
ones, and I
used.
thought they were pretty good.
It was a prototype machine that wasn't particularly easy to program.
It's not even a
it was still
comparison.
fast.
But these are Dad's
Calculating
O's or
integrals and
Dad's
prime
Rings
numbers
or
with
something. I
Paul.
can't remember what they're called.
It's
Thin
here
mints
that I
are
should
so
introduce a
good.
man named
But there's no
Actually
coconut in
retarded.
those.
a student of
These look like
mathematics
they're
and
pretty
physics
good,
at
though.
Cambridge.
These are
Oh, these are like a
above every other.
macaroon. These are like a macaroon.
These are fucking
In early
amazing. dude.
1951, he was introduced
And the
to one
crazy
point
part about
the
these is
NPL.
you can't. The ones that the
Given
Girl
access to
Scouts
these
have
pilot
or whatever,
machine.
they come from like one fucking
His work
bakery.
here was
The
inspired by
Samoas,
June
not the fucking
1950
caramel
article
littles
in
or whatever the
Penguin
fuck they
Science
call the other
News.
ones. Caramel
A
lights.
theory of
Bullshit.
chess and noughts
These
and
ones come from
crosses,
like one place,
Ew.
written by Donald
and nothing
Davis,
else tastes like
the
them.
ace project
Bugger, why do you
invented
smell
now.
so weird?
The article was a mathematical
Because their
breakdown
asshole
of the
is in your
decision-making
eyeball
and
2
rules
seconds ago.
that
Oh,
govern
Booger,
games
you're a
of
big
chess.
chonker. I can't believe I let you
Part of
trick
the
me into
newly
feeding you
emerging
so
field of game
often.
theory, led by computer scientists like John von Neumann. This was the dawn of artificial intelligence, and there was a great interest in teaching these so-called electronic brains to think, to teach them how to play games. Strachey was a teacher, and he decided to undertake this implementation. Not noughts and crosses, as that was too simple, nor chess, for that was far too complex. Instead, he chose the intermediate game of
Draughts.
I just lost my game of Victoria.
checkers, if you prefer.
Drafts.
With only 2 types of piece, men and kings, and only half the squares traversable, it would be feasible given the confines of early computer capability. Of course, programs for these machines were planned on paper before being compiled on punch tape and executed, which meant that Strachey didn't have the luxury of debuggers, breakpoints, or anything like that. He would have to write and check his code
Are you
manually.
farty, Bug? Are you farting?
He finished a preliminary drafts program by May 1951,
Ugh.
but it wasn't until the 30th of July
Dude, is this video getting longer?
Oh, she is farting.
it didn't work.
God damn.
However, by this time there were more capable machines out there.
This video's
And the
1,000 years
computing
long.
project at the University of Manchester
It got
made
longer. The
considerable
bar is
progress.
somehow went backwards or something.
I know.
Had a
It's
full-scale
crazy.
production machine delivered in February 1951, the culmination of 5 years of development. The first of the Manchester computers was the Baby. This was designed as a test bed, in much the same way as the Pilot Ace, so its practical use was limited. There were some exercises in pure mathematics, highest proper factors, long division, and other arithmetical facilities. But it wasn't long before the machine was rebuilt into a more expanded form. The Manchester Mark I was a full-scale computer which, while still a prototype, started to see more serious use, including the calculation of Mersenne primes, investigation of the Riemann hypothesis, symbolic logic, ray tracing, and Laguerre
Ray
functions.
tracing.
Even so, it was a short-lived computer, quickly replaced by its commercial version, the Ferranti Mark I. Eventually, there would be 9 such machines made, including a later revision, but the first Mark I went to the University of Manchester. Here, it served the university's computing needs until its replacement in 1959. Notable uses include calculations for the Armaments Research Establishment, the British nuclear weapons program, and the development of Mark I autocode, a higher-level means of programming the computer that was widely used. The Ferranti machine also saw some work relating to games. Dietrich Prinz developed the first ever chess-playing program in November 1951. It wasn't a video game. It didn't use the Williams Tube display for any graphical purpose. But it was only a matter of time. Back to Christopher Strachey and his implementation of drafts. Strachey first learned of the Ferranti Mark I in the spring of 1951, and quickly took the opportunity to write to Alan Turing, describing his interest.
Alan Turing.
In return, Strachey received a copy of Turing's infamously opaque programming handbook for the Manchester computer, and an invite to see the machine for himself. He first visited Manchester in July, and over the next year, between careful study of the handbook and occasional visit, he familiarised himself with the machine, ran some programs, and forged a reputation as a formidable programmer. But as much as he had mastered the technical side, there was something of an artistic streak that ran through his work. He made the computer play music, composed love letters, and in the summer of 1952, he successfully ran his revised drafts program and
Oh,
played a video game.
little bugger.
His implementation worked. The computer was able to play a complete game of drafts at a reasonable speed. Generously, he even took pictures of the video display and published his work.
Generously.
So, what does this mean? it means the first video game is Christopher Strachey's Drafts. First implemented circa 1951, but confirmed working, complete with evidence, by no later than July 1952.
Pinball's not a video game?
Video games
Yeah, I don't doubt
are a
it.
British invention.
Pinball's a hardware game, man. There's no video involved.
In any case, we have an answer. There are, of course, a couple of caveats. Firstly, to be clear, Strachey's Drafts is the first video game for which we have evidence. It remains possible that there was undocumented work prior, but we can only draw conclusions from the evidence we have.
Dude, I'd just like to warn you there is some sort of
Secondly,
autism
Our
brewing.
assertion only holds true as long as you subscribe to the definition we laid out.
What do you mean?
A
People getting
lucid,
mad,
not include
autism's
the
getting mad in the
1947
chat.
device,
You know, people are getting upset.
or maybe something even earlier.
They're always like that, though. You know?
That said, I think our definition is robust.
They're sick. They have a sickness.
One thing is clear. The 1947 device has had zero lasting impact on video games. Long forgotten until it was dredged up during the Magnavox lawsuits.
Dredged up.
Christopher Strachey, on the other hand, was a bit of a pioneer. His 1952 presentation at the University of Toronto inspired Arthur Samuel's later work on machine learning. Strachey developed the CPL programming language, an important ancestor of C. His influence is broad, and it permeates computer science. In regards to the first video game, I was equal parts pleased and dismayed to discover that I wasn't the first to arrive at this conclusion. There are two others. One is Jack Copeland, Professor of Philosophy at the University of Canterbury, Christchurch, New Zealand,
Canterbury.
and an authority on the life and work of Alan Turing. As a product of his detailed research into early computing history and Turing's correspondence with Strachey, he describes the operation of Strachey's Drafts program and calls it the world's first computer game. It's not the first computer game, but we can assume he means the first computer game with a video display. The second to draw this conclusion is Alvy Ray Smith, co-founder of Lucasfilm's computer division and Pixar. His 2015 article, The Dawn of Digital Light, is a detailed examination of the origins of computer-generated digital images that makes some rather bold statements. The first digital picture, the first computer animations, the first video game. He ranks Strachey first, Gill's Sheepengate second, and Douglas's Noughts and Crosses third. I'm inclined to agree. In broader coverage, Strachey's Drafts is sometimes included in the early history of video games, but is seldom upheld as the champion. It's a difficult call to make, given the lack of a universal definition of video game, and the rather ragged margin at its furthest extent. But I feel as though we have our
Yeah, I thought this
answer.
was going to be RuneScape 2.
The mid-20th century was a real frontier for electronics. By 1950, transistors were in their infancy, and integrated circuits were a decade away. The only place video games could have started prior to the age of Pong was in the computer lab. Here there was high technology with no concern for commercial viability, and vast budgets were approved, ostensibly for more serious computations, but the games slipped through the cracks. But here's the thing. Nobody called these early computer experiments video games, at least not at the time. It's a retroactive label, given only once video games had pierced popular culture. And the term video game dates to later than you might think. So, one final question. When did video games become video games? A search on Google Books Ngram Viewer gives us an idea of the time frame. The term emerged at some point between 1970 and 1975, coinciding with Pong's early success. This is borne out with a search through the popular gaming press, scarce as it was in the 1970s. The February 1976 issue of Byte magazine uses the term Pong-style video game in a familiar way. A broader search of literature on Google Books doesn't turn up anything prior to 1975. However, Google Newspapers does have a 1974 feature on space-age pinball machines that details the rise of the new coin-operated video games, which means the term must have started to gain traction by this point. There's a 1973 article in Business Week that must have been written just after Pong had found early commercial success. It describes a red-hot market for video games, in what might be the earliest instance of the term in a major publication. There are also a couple of false positives that crop up. A 1974 issue of New Scientist uses the term to mean video business.
New
as in
Scientist.
the video game. It was around this time that the first video playback devices were hitting the domestic market. Earlier still, there are some surprising mentions of video game in the 1950s. But it turns out this is an older term for televised sports games, back when such a thing wasn't universal. It's increasingly clear that Pong is close to the origin. So let's skip straight to the source. Here's the promotional flyer for the 1972 Atari arcade game. The newest two-player video skill game from Atari Corporation, Syzygy engineered, the team that pioneered video technology. So in 1972, Pong was described as a video skill game, which is almost, but not quite, what we're looking for. There is a definite emphasis on the term video. Atari's next game, Space Race, released July 1973.
The online advice
does use
show.
the term
Play
video
old
game
school
within
RuneScape
its
now.
text.
Jesus
And
Christ.
later that year, in
Thanks a lot,
September,
play old school
via the Pong
RuneScape
Doubles,
now for the
featured a
fucking
prominent at the very
90
top.
fucking dollarinis,
Atari's
but
new video game.
it just ain't gonna happen, pimp. I ain't gonna play old school
So
RuneScape.
1973 was the year that the term video game
Really
shot to
appreciate it.
prominence
And
was
I
fixed
hope this isn't
in
a giant
arcade
long
lexicon.
RuneScape video. It is a giant long RuneScape
But where's the
video.
first use? In researching this, I found a particularly good post from the Golden Age arcade historian titled "The
I have played
Etymology
old school
of
RuneScape.
Video Game." It confirms
It's an
our
okay
suspicion.
game.
Atari and Pong are
I don't hate
very
it.
much at the center of the term.
I like gambling in old
tracking
school
the first
RuneScape,
use in the trade press to March 1973.
but it is what it is.
Interestingly, there is also a letter from Nolan Bushnell to John Britz at Bally, dated July the 10th, 1972, in which Nolan uses the term. This might be the first documented use. It seems video game was the term used by Atari to describe their new product to potential purchasers. Venue owners rather than players.
It's a. Oh my god.
So, two
Well,
things.
you know.
The term video game dates to around.
I hate to break it to you, but I'm not gonna be
1972,
awake for the whole
reaching
fucking video.
popularity by 73, 74.
I probably won't even be awake for most
And
of
it
it.
seems it was devised for the benefit of the arcade amusement industry.
It's a two and a half hour video.
To distinguish this new class of machine. So while Nolan Bushnell can't take credit for many original ideas, it seems he is the man that named the industry.
It's 2.5
and the
hours.
one that kickstarted its commercial success. There's an argument to be made that the first video game was the game first described as such. And it seems the answer
Fucked
to
up.
that is Pong. Pong was the catalyst, and Atari's games are likely the main reason we use the label video game to cover all kinds of interactive entertainment. If Pong had failed and it was the 8-bit microcomputers...
How much was that?
found the
$90
success, then computer
Media
games
share's
might
cheap,
be
okay? You guys can keep
definitive term.
yourselves entertained all night.
In fact, in certain regions at certain times, this has been true. But the Americans settled on video game, and their influence means most of the world has adopted the term as the standard. It's far divorced from its original meaning. The term meant to distinguish early arcade games from their electromechanical counterparts. But it seems it's stuck, and has since been applied to all sorts of things. Computer games, arcade amusements, television games, handheld electronic games, mobile games, and virtual reality. What we know is video
I don't have
games
anything on RuneScape. I lost it all
have
gambling.
a single origin. They're a constellation. So if anybody asks you, what was the first ever video game? You could tell them it was...
I lost my
Star
code I
Trek
want gambling.
1952.
Will you be my
It might
RuneScape
be
boyfriend,
easy to say
Toad? No, because I'm not going to play
Pong
RuneScape.
or something.
I'll be a MapleStory
Because,
boyfriend.
well,
You know, we can get married to
it's trickier
MapleStory.
than they think. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, farewell.
Maple Switch is RuneScape, but cooler and more Korean. Korean RuneScape.
Alright, I'm going to bed. Good night.
What do you, dude? You just woke up. You didn't even
No, I
work
didn't.
today. Didn't even fucking work today.
I know. I really wanted to, but
You're like spending all day like dinking around with your phone, like some kind of like phone woman.
I got roped into fucking shop.
Yeah. Everyone's always roping you, dude. Everyone's always roping Dune off, getting ropes out of
Alright,
the
keep it
stock.
up. You know what? I'm gonna fucking rope myself because of you. I hope you're happy.
Dude, that would be so epic. You mean jerk off, right? Hello? Hello? I guess you want to go jerk off. Or as I like to call it, roping off. Because I shoot ropes out of my penis. Where's his briefcase at, dude? Well, there it is. That's cool. That is so
The
flippin'
online
cool.
advice show.
I donated this video a while ago, but it didn't play. Are my vids just bad? _
No, but how long ago was it? Nothing should have gotten skipped. Was it today? You might have missed it. Nothing's been skipped. Over a week? Oh, I don't know. It might have played, you just didn't notice it. I've never, I only skip videos when they're against the rules or if they're age restricted. gonna be a long ass RuneScape video. You know, I'm just gonna play this. Hold on. I'm gonna play the short video first, and then I'll add the
Charlie
RuneScape
Company
video
of the
back.
1st Battalion is pinned down short of the airfield when Gunnery Sergeant John Bassalone makes a break for the nearest bunker.
No, we saw
Vanilla
this.
John Bassalone
I remember
is
this
a Marine
video.
Corps legend, having been
This
awarded
didn't get
the
skipped.
Medal
We
of
saw
Honor
that. I
during the
remember this
Guadalcanal
video.
campaign. After being recalled from active service
I literally
to sell
remember
war
this
bonds
video.
on a publicity tour, Bassalone has requested to return to the front.
This did not get
He
skipped. I
intends to
literally
make the
remember
most of
watching
his
this.
opportunity. Bassalone has sprinted from the cover of a sand embankment through heavy enemy fire and flanks around the side of the bunker. He tosses a satchel charge through the
I literally
firing
remember
port,
watching this.
followed by grenades to neutralize the Japanese strongpoint. With the machine gun out of action, the rest of the Marines move up to the airfield. Bassalone spots a Sherman tank that has made it off the beach but is stuck in a minefield under heavy enemy fire. He runs to the tank and attempts to guide it out of the minefield. Despite artillery and mortar shells falling around him, he successfully
Nah,
leads
it's
the
almost
tank
done.
to safety and returns to his men still pinned down on the edge of the airfield. Bassalone gathers his men and shouts, "Come on you guys, we gotta get these guns off the beach." He and his men charge across the airfield to attack an enemy strongpoint. As he sprints across the open ground, John Bassalone is cut down by machine gun fire and is killed instantly. He will be posthumously awarded the Navy Cross, becoming the only Marine to receive the United States' 2 highest awards for gallantry.
Gallantry.
However, word that John got it makes its way through the ranks as shaken soldiers realise that Iwo Jima is no ordinary battle. On the northernmost landing beach, 3rd Battalion of
There you go. Here's the fucking RuneScape video. Bum, 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 bum. Pay the full price to watch the full 2 episodes of the Battle of the Bulge. Will you watch it? I'll watch anything that gets uploaded as long as I'm awake. But I have to be honest, it's going to be daylight savings in a couple minutes for most people. I'm probably going to be in bed before this video is done. I don't plan on staying awake like until this video is done, honestly. It's going to be 5 a.m. by the time this shit's over. Or not even. It's going to be 6 a.m. by the time this
It's
video is done.
1998 again. I'm 4 years old and don't even know anything about the internet or video games. Across the pond, however, 20-year-old Fitzwilliam College computer science student from Cambridge, England, Andrew Gower, has been working on a project on and off for the last 7 months of this year.
We're not actually saving daylight this time. We're going to standard time.
AKA
Saving
Devious
daylight
Mud.
is in the
Working
spring.
on this project in his spare time, he was working part-time for a video gaming website called Games Domain, one of the leading gaming websites online at this time, with approximately 1.4 million users, accumulating 15 million page views per month. With Andrew as the lead programmer, and his brother Ian, who worked on graphics a bit, they developed a program called Castle Games Domain, an online lobby for the website that hosted 10 other games that could be played once logged into the castle. This program would run for a couple of years and have many fans until Yahoo purchased and closed down the service, ultimately killing Castle Games Domain and most of Andrew's work. Honing his skills through his university, his job, and simply just on his own throughout the years since the age of 7, Andrew Gower decided that he himself would like to create something similar that was his and wouldn't be sold to another company. Thus began Devious Mud. Andrew and his brothers grew up playing all sorts of dungeon-based games, mostly with their father as children. Their family would travel to castles in the real world sometimes, and the 3 brothers couldn't get enough of the adventuristic feel and the fantasies of the medieval era. Paul and Ian described their brother Andrew as always being at the computer, creating something. Their father would purchase books for the boys. For Paul and Ian, mostly graphical books, as that's what they were into at the time, always drawing and creating fantasy worlds and characters. Andrew, on the other hand, received books about computer programming. He loved creating his own games and playing MUDs online, games that were multiplayer and were simply just text-based, without images, and required a lot of imagination. One of his favorites at the time was a MUD called Non-Event, and it heavily inspired him. Andrew wanted to create an online medieval multiplayer video gaming experience that was similar, but he wanted it to actually have graphics instead of just being a traditional MUD. With his background knowledge in creating MUDs as well as Java games, he knew that he could achieve this.
The online advice show.
It's not anonymous.
To a graphical MUD called
Unfortunately,
Ultima
your video
Online.
is not
However,
going to
Andrew
play
never
for a while.
actually got to play it, and he would later state that that was probably a good thing, so Devious Mud didn't come out too similar. During this year, on his webpage, Andrew described this project as a mammoth task. He began redesigning all of the internal file formats that were used to make the game much more extendable and easier to edit. He continued on to say that this is taking a long time, but should be worth the effort. When I finish this, it'll be very easy for anyone to add new monsters, new objects, new blocks, new maps, new skills, new quests, new spells, etc. When he used the term anyone to add new anything, I assume he means those he chooses to work on the game with him. As of right now of this year though, Andrew is the only one working on Devious Mud. Devious Mud would not go online until next year in '99 on a website ran by Andrew called Cunning and Devious Games. It is now 1999, and Devious Mud has now been completely rewritten by Andrew with the help of his brothers Ian and Paul Gower. During this year, Andrew Gower owned a website that could be found at the URL of cunninganddeviousgames.com. This website would feature 5 games with Devious Mud included. Among their most popular games on the site at the time was a game called Grinders, in which you'd use a joystick to draw a line on the game screen, avoiding obstacles against a second player that was to be your opponent until one of you failed and the other one had gained a point. Another popular game was Destruction Imminent, a single-player first-person shooter game with multiple weapons in which you travel.
Man, this motherfucking Doom.
And humanoid monsters, as well as dodging and destroying machinery such as turrets and robots through each level. These 2 games and the others on the website were available at the price of £10 and were to be sold on a floppy disk. Apart from his Cunning and Devious Games website, Andrew also had his own personal webpage called Andrew's Homepage. However, I do not know what the URL to it was. On his website, though, he would have different subject categories on the page that people could browse. For example, under the Fireworks category, Andrew shows off his first effort into writing programs in DirectX. Fireworks was a screensaver he had developed and shared with others during this year. Within the Atari Zone, Fractals, Bottomless Pit, Penguins, and Ray Tracing categories, you could find other games that Andrew had made. Something else interesting, under the Music category, was a little brother-like program in relation to Devious Mud called Cunning Mod. Essentially, Cunning Mod was a library for DJGPP, a development tool used to compile files. In other words, Cunning Mod was basically a sound library and media player program that would work together with a compiler program when it came to adding music and sounds into programs like games that were still under development. The argument for Cunning Mod being a little brother program to Devious Mud was that both of these programs were later taken down within a week of each other during this year. Going back to Devious Mud, Andrew's biggest project among the others at the time, there was Devious Mud Alpha and Devious Mud Beta. The Alpha was the first version that was never released to the public, as Andrew felt it wasn't ready, and the Beta was the second version that was released publicly for about a week before Andrew decided to scrap it. While the Beta was public, Andrew had his friend he met through his part-time job he had at Games Domain try out Devious Mud. That person was Rob Law, otherwise known as Rab, who would later become the first RuneScape player ever, but more on that later. Rab also convinced some of his other friends to try out Devious Mud as well, those people being Lightning, Merlin, and Guge. There was loads to do, and much of the game was unfinished and had a lot of bugs. Andrew stated that he made this version of Devious Mud in his bedroom before Jagex and everything that Jagex entailed later on. Only half of one quest was done at the time, called Sheep Shearer. There were also about 2
I missed you 10 times. I'm really worried about you.
Only about 10 objects.
Hey man, I go to bed early these days, you know?
We're being able to force an NPC through walls when
I go to
fighting
bed
them,
early these days.
characters not facing each other when talking.
You
it was
caught
hard
up.
to go up and down stairs. Items of armor that should have totally obscured any clothing underneath didn't yet. You could talk to NPCs that were running away from your attacks, and much, much more. Towards the end of Devious Mud,
I got
a
too much
quest
nightmare
compiler
shit
was
to do.
finished, but didn't support many commands. The player-to-player conversation system was worked on heavily, but still itself wasn't finished, and Andrew had finished designing a wooded forest area to the left of the starting zone. Devious Mud did have a resizable game screen though, which is something that RuneScape wouldn't have until a decade later. A server could also hold 2,500 players at the time, more than even one RuneScape server can hold today. At the end of it all on this year on March 28th, one of the last written updates for Devious Mud by Andrew Gower stated as follows: "Fix some more bugs. I've not got as much done as I would have liked, but I'm putting it online anyway. I've put the beta version of Devious Mud online and a few people have tried it out. However, I'm having another break from writing it to give me some more time to do other Java games that I'm working on. It's not really anywhere near finished yet, so I've removed the address from this page. Try again in a few months' time." During Devious Mud's time online, there were about 20 players that played it. After graduating university, Andrew was offered 2 jobs, one with his friends over at Games Domain, and another from a man named Constant Tedder, who owned a competitor towards Games Domain called GamesWire. Towards the end of this year, Andrew and his brothers Ian and Paul decided to go it alone though, and began trading under a new name other than Cunning and Devious Games. Cunning and Devious Games came to an end, and the new name that they eventually decided on was Jagex. It stood for a variety of things: Java Audio and Graphics Extension, Java Gaming Experts, as well as just about the gaming experience.
Java
Jagex
Audio
had finally
Graphics
been born.
Extension. That's kind of nifty.
Y2K has happened and the world hasn't ended, but Devious Mud has.
Java.
The new game
Java is
technology
sick.
was underway.
That's cool.
After
More
throwing
remains.
ideas around, and of course checking that the domain name was
You
free,
big J
the
head.
brothers decided on the name RuneScape for their new game. Its original logo was actually just the name in stones without the sword like we see today, but the brothers' friends had some fun with that first idea, calling the game Run Escape and not its actual name. So the
Run
sword was
Escape.
eventually added between Rune and Scape later on by Ian. Commonly practiced while developing Mud games
Run
at this time,
Escape.
to make adding content into them easier, developers used
Run
scripting
Escape.
systems. Paul and Ian Gower came up with great ideas for the
That's
game at
kinda
this
nifty.
time, but they came up with ideas much faster than Andrew could implement them. So, Andrew created his own scripting system that Paul and Ian themselves could use to implement his ideas into the game to alleviate some of the imbalance. That system became known as RuneScript. After Paul learned how to use RuneScript and the map editor, he eventually made Lumbridge Castle the starting point for the game. The first NPC ever added was actually a sheep, and if you look here at the sheep from Devious Mud, you can see lots of similarities. Another NPC that Paul first created that would wander around Lumbridge Castle would be Hans. From there, the cook's assistant quest was born as well. In fact, the sounds that were in the game were mainly recorded from real life, like opening and closing doors and cooking. Cooking anything on a fire or a range in RuneScape at this time was actually the recorded sound of Andrew Gower's mother cooking bacon in a skillet. She even drew 4 monsters for him, those being a camel, a bear, a spider, and a bat, and they were all put into the game. Much of the game's graphics and playstyle mechanics were inspired by other games such as LucasArts, Monkey Island, and Day of the Tentacle that were popular at this time as well. Announcing
Monkey
to Games Domain
Island?
that RuneScape was almost ready for launch, he recruited some people who had earlier played Devious Mud. Once again, Rab was back, testing another project for the Gower brothers. Excluding the brothers, he was the first player to ever sign up for RuneScape. Lightning, Gugge, and Merlin were back as well. Rab was actually given Jagex moderator privileges and helped to moderate the game once it had released to the public after a testing period in March of this year. At this time, in-game moderator crowns did not exist yet, so players wouldn't be able to tell who was a moderator and who wasn't. The game did have bugs, and sometimes players would get stuck somewhere, so moderators were required when Andrew, Ian, and Paul weren't online. Rab's Jagex moderator account was simply just called Moderator. Also copied over from Devious Mud was much of the Mud's map ideals. Places like Varrock, Al-Kharid, Falador, and Port Sarim were also copied over in concept. Rab learned how to use the RuneScript scripting system too, and actually wrote the Romeo and Juliet quest during this year, around 4 to 5 months before the release of RuneScape to the public at the beginning of 2001. Rab stated in 2010 that he wrote the quest partly because there were a few people speaking about quest writing, and he thought that if an outsider wrote one, then perhaps others would too, and the game would receive a bigger community due to this. Rab also had a hand in creating the Prince Ali rescue quest and the Dorix quest as well. Feeling satisfied with the amount of content that had been placed into the game by the Gower brothers at Jagex and their friends, RuneScape was ready for launch on one playable server game world to the public. It's January 4th, 2001, and the pressure was on. One playable server that could only hold 2,000 players turned out to be a big undersight, and the Gower brothers were overwhelmed, having to set up more game worlds to take on the extra players, as they didn't want to turn anyone away that wanted to play. Frantically working against the clock, Andrew kept having to re-engineer the servers to keep up with the number of players being registered. When players did register, they had a few options when creating their players. Character types used to exist as bonuses when starting, but your account became more rounded the more you progressed later on, catching up with whatever bonus you chose when you started. These categories were Adventure, Warrior, Wizard, Ranger, and Miner. For example, if you chose Wizard, you'd get more runes when you started out, and your 2 magic levels would be a little boosted. If you chose Miner, your level would be boosted as well.
Miners?
Pickaxe, but it wouldn't be bronze. Specific metal types of items such as pickaxes back then didn't exist yet. Only one specific pickaxe did, and it was just called Pickaxe. Also, when you started, you wouldn't be on Tutorial Island, as it didn't exist yet either, and wouldn't until next year. This was actually the location that you started, outside of Lumbridge Castle, as well as your respawn point if you happened to die. Compared to the RuneScape Classic versions later in 2002 and 2003, there was actually a lot missing in the first few months of 2001. For example, the Report Abuse button didn't exist yet. The area Misthalin was the only area in the game that existed at the time, and the Asgarnia area was added later in the year. Banks weren't released until the 23rd of January this year, 19 days after the release of the game. Even with Banks releases though, players still had to keep all of their items on them because the banks would only hold coins at the time. And speaking of coins, the max amount that you could hold in a single inventory slot and one bank slot was 65,535 coins, and the same number cap applied to all stackable items during this time as well. Because of this, PKers would often work together with skillers, having them hold their cash stacks while they risked all their other items PKing, which you could also do anywhere in the game at this time because the wilderness didn't exist yet. When you were fighting, it was mandatory for both players to hit each other 3 times before being able to retreat, so the goal was to kill your opponent in 3 hits before they could flee, and the same rule applied to combat with NPCs as well. Next month in February, an option was created for players where they could toggle whether or not they wanted their account to be a player killer or a non-player killer, and this could be switched a few times before you got stuck with one of the categories. Looking at this screenshot from Blue Rose 13X in 2001, you'll notice a number of differences on the stat menu as well. For starters, the font is different compared to the later RSC stat menu. Magic and prayer were divided into 2 skills, pray good and pray evil, good magic and evil magic. Tailoring was a skill in which you'd craft armor, but this was later merged with the crafting skill, which at this time, the crafting skill itself, was in the game but didn't actually work yet. Your influence skill was raised by completing quests, so it was basically an early version of quest points. Influence granted you perks with NPCs just as quest points do today. The fishing and fletching skills also hadn't been released yet. Thieving was on the stats menu, but also didn't work properly, much like crafting. On the equipment status portion of the menu, there was a hiding bonus as well. Hiding was an equipment bonus that existed briefly, and it was intended to help keep aggressive monsters away from the player by reducing the monster's chances of noticing you. It was on the equipment status list, but was never actually implemented. Instead, at this time, you could use a good magic spell called Camouflage that would hide you from monsters this way, which is why hiding may have never been implemented. In May, however, good magic and evil magic, along with pray good and pray evil, were merged into just 2 regular skills, being magic and prayer. Next month, on June 11th, 2001, the island of Karamja.
No big deal. Pimp Hard Magnus is a little bitch.
Before fishing, players would have to use
I just didn't have
skill-based
my,
skills such as pizzas. PKers also
I didn't have my
finally
die
had better food to
move.
eat in combat, and no
I didn't have
longer
my
had to rely
die
on
move
skillers as
ready.
much. A lot of players during this time stopped choosing the player killer account
I forgot
mode,
how to play
however,
this
because the
game.
cost of losing your items was way too high, and the number of players playing the game that could attack you just kept increasing.
How many do I have left?
RuneScape already
3,
had
that's good enough.
600,000 players registered by July of this year, so the Gower brothers knew that they needed a new system for keeping players' items safe, so they updated the banks around RuneScape to be able to carry all of your items instead of just your coins. 18 days later, on August 13, 2001, the Wilderness was released in the north for fighting, making PvP allowable everywhere, as well as the PKer account modes a thing of the past. To the Gower brothers' surprise, players were literally playing RuneScape for 10 to 15 hours a day. Level 99 was the
Pretty
maximum
much
you
of a
could obtain in
crackhead.
a skill, and just 8 months after the
Anyone
game's
wants to
release on
join
the 28th of
Hard
August,
Lucid
a
Will
player
Party,
called
DPS?
Everdred became the
I'm
first
not
player
fucking good
ever
enough.
to achieve the very first level 99 in RuneScape, being the woodcutting skill.
I ain't fucking good enough,
fam.
fam.
At this time,
See?
when the
I'm not
Gallo
fucking
brothers
good
made
enough.
level 99 the maximum level for stats, they never really imagined that anybody would ever attain that level in any skill. Next month in September, the Dragon Slayer quest was added, and with it, so was rune armor and weapons. Before runes existed, adamant armor and weaponry was actually the best in the game. On the 21st of October, Blue Rose 13X was the first to level 99 magic. The high scores began this month as well, in an early concept form. The initial
What?
concept of the high scores was
How
to
are you?
display the best player in
Just
a
ganging
particular
around?
skill or profession on each
That's
server.
cool, you hanging
On the
out,
24th
or-
of November,
Yeah, I'm
the
sort of
concept
hanging out,
the
I
high
guess.
score table was changed, showing player ranks overall, along with all of their stat levels and experience points.
RuneScape, huh?
But would
You
only
heard of this
record
game?
and display
Yeah, I've
the
heard of the
top
RuneScape
2,000
before, yeah.
players. The maximum number of stackable
Isn't it
playing
daylight
times
savings
was
now?
finally updated during this month too, changing the new max number from 65.5k to 2.147
What time is
bill,
it?
as we know it to be today.
Fuck.
On the 13th of December, Blue Rose
Great
13X
quest.
was also, once again, the first to another level 99, which was smithing. At this time, she was the only player that could make full rune armor sets, and because of it, she could essentially charge however much she wanted to. Blue Rose 13X was eventually given, along with Rab and the others I mentioned in the year 2000.
I'm
the
retarded, I'm
secret
retarded, I'm
moderator
retarded,
status
I
as
haven't
well.
played.
Rab, however, would resign from his secret moderator position at the end of this year due to the amount of stress that the job involved. This year became
don't die,
a
don't die,
very
don't die, don't die,
successful,
don't die.
yet stressful year for all three
Oh,
brothers.
okay, easy peasy,
RuneScape
lemon
launched at a
squeezy.
very interesting time. It was just as the internet was becoming a big thing, and the dot-com bubble era was beginning. The dot-com bubble, also known as the internet bubble, was a rapid rise in technology stock equity valuations fueled by investments in internet-based companies during the late 90s. In other words, RuneScape launched right when people really began using the internet and when people began investing in internet-based companies like JagX at this time. All sorts of online multiplayer games were coming out, and it was exciting because before them, you'd have to be in a room with your friends if you wanted to play, say, Dungeons and Dragons. With broadband and dial-up internet becoming more popular everywhere, it also meant that RuneScape could be played in other places than just your personal home. You could play it at your school computer labs, public libraries, and anywhere else that had a public internet connection, which really helped
Sleeping?
RuneScape
Bumfights is
spread
going to
at first.
sleep?
Disaster would soon strike for
It is
Andrew,
getting pretty
Paul, and
late.
Ian, though, because purely internet-based
I
companies
can't even,
like JagX began losing over 70% of their
I don't know what time it is
valuations
anymore.
on the Financial Times Stock Exchange Index
3 a.m.
on the
here.
London Stock Exchange. Advertisers
It's
began
3 a.m. in
pulling the plug on
Saskatoon.
Internet-based companies and their websites. JagX had lost their advertisement investors as well, and the ad revenue they had wasn't enough to keep the game running. It was literally costing Andrew Gower money to continue.
What's your
to keep the
time?
game
What time is it
online
for you,
since
Landon?
membership didn't exist yet. Not
It's
wanting to
3.
shut it down for all the players' sake.
So you went
and
back
hard
an hour
work over
already.
the years, he decided to move back in with
Okay,
his
so now we're in
parents
the same
Nottingham,
time zone.
England, to try and save
Yeah.
money. There,
Apparently it
Ian,
happened
Paul,
like an
and
hour or
Andrew
two
would
ago.
set up a divider curtain in
Right.
their parents' kitchen, and this area would serve as a makeshift office for them to continue working on the game. It was also during this year that
Can't
Andrew
believe
was
Dune
approached
didn't
by
stay
a
up
player
until
named
daylight
RS
savings. What a
Guide, who
pussy.
said he wanted to purchase RuneScape with JagX, but was later found out to be a fraud. Andrew stated that this player
went to
had
bed
begun
early as
asking
fuck,
him
or-
to send
Well,
him
he went to
money
bed
via
like
Western
30
Union
minutes ago,
transactions,
I
and he
guess?
became suspicious. Andrew had checked his website at the time and found out that RS Guide's website
It's
wasn't
1 a.m.
getting near as
in
much
the
traffic as he
West
had led him to
Coast.
believe. They were eventually supposed
So
to
in
meet
2
with lawyers
hours,
as
it'll
well.
be daylight
Andrew
savings
also
for you
found out that
guys.
RS Guide lied about even having a lawyer booked in a nearby hotel. where they
It's
both
always
met.
confusing for
Andrew
me
never
every
sent RS Guide
year.
money or signed any contracts with him though, and the deal obviously fell through. RS Guide seemed legitimate at first though, so he was eventually given moderator status within the game, but this was later revoked. Ending this year on a high note, though, RuneScape received their second holiday event on Christmas. The first holiday event took place back in October in this year. Edible pumpkins were spawned around the world for players to find. Christmas crackers were dropped around the game during Christmas, though, and when used on another player, one of them would receive a different colored party hat that was inside. The crackers, party hats, and pumpkins were not worth much during this time, though, and were mostly given away, eaten, lost, or sold to general stores around the game. But today in RuneScape 3, since not many of these items exist anymore from this time, those items are now
Princess
worth billions,
Pee-Pee.
making them also worth thousands of real-life dollars. Stepping away from the business side of the game for now, let's talk about some player achievements during this year. A player named TKS was the first player ever to reach 99 cooking on January 8th of this year. She would also continue on to be the first player to level 99 fishing 4 months later on May 23rd. She was ranked 1 overall in the game at this time, actively competing against the Old Knight. A little unknown fact about TKS was that her username was an abbreviation of her real name, Tina K, and in her spare time, she had a website where she tracked her weight loss journey through a low-carb diet. She also stated that she had only started playing RuneScape because of her kids, and she just wanted to be better than them, and she was. The Old Knight even admitted that he was only ever able to overtake the rank because she had eventually quit in the summer of 2003. Unfortunately, after the username cleanup in 2014, TKS lost her username to somebody else. The person who took her display name kindly campaigned on the RuneScape forums to have her name restored to the original account, but Jagex never fulfilled this request. Later, she reported that she could not see herself playing RuneScape without her original name, so she unfortunately quit for good. On April 5th, Cow Chicken was the first to 99 firemaking. On the 16th of May, Zhonghui was the first to 99 attack and level 123 combat, the max combat level at the time. In June, Lady Killjoy was the first to 99 strength. On the 3rd of August, Swede Mike was the first to 99 thieving. Next month in September, Joe Bill 64 was the first to level 99 mining. On the 17th of September, Snake Slava was the first to level 99 range, and those conclude all of the players to the first 99s within this year. Going back to February, at the beginning of this year, on the business-related end of RuneScape and Jagex,
How the fuck
the
that
Gala
up?
brothers have been working in their parents' kitchen for the last 6 months, and the game was still costing more to run than it was making in profit. 1 million
I
players
goofed that
had been
up big
registered by
fucking
February
time.
of this year, and Andrew knew something needed to change fast. The brothers began discussing putting paid membership into the game, but Andrew also knew
I'm
that if he
goofing up
did
big
this,
time,
Jagex
fam.
would have to become a much more commercial operation, and that he wouldn't be able to just ignore customer support emails if he was taking players' money. Andrew wasn't very experienced in running a company to turn a profit.
Oh, I'm
and knew he
goofing
would stay
up.
open. That's when he remembered Constant Tedder, the CEO of GamesWire that had previously offered him a job 2 years ago in 1999. Constant Tedder agreed to work with Andrew and was named CEO of Jagex, a position he would keep until 2007. RuneScape needed around 3,000 membership subscribers to cover the server hosting costs. On the 27th
Man,
of
I haven't done
February,
this in like
membership
fucking
was
3
fully
weeks.
installed,
Fucking
and
big
it was confirmed
mistake.
by Paul Gower at RuneFest in 2010 that the first membership benefit was being able to log in anytime you wanted. Within the first few days, 5,000 players subscribed to membership, and the Gower brothers were blown away, and their game was saved. Membership also brought in new quests, such as the Hero's Quest
Cocksucker.
and Lost City, which in turn yielded
Ah,
players for the first time
yeah.
ever, a Dragon Battle Axe and a Dragon
Yeah.
Longsword. The Dragon Medium
Just 'cause I
helmet
got that
was also added this
motherfucking
year, and
thunder
later, most of
barrage
the
bolt
northeastern parts of the
thingy.
Kandarian region on the world map were released as
Bitch-ass
well.
lizard.
Not stopping after his success, though, Andrew rushed to further his company by posting an area on the Jagex website advertising that they were recruiting programmers and 2D and 3D graphics artists. He then went down to a conference
These other
and
ones
meeting
are
center
much
called
easier.
St. John's Innovation Center, asking for an office to begin interviewing potential staff members. After receiving office for holding interviews, people began showing up the very next day due to their advertisements on the Jagex website. There was no furniture in the office, though. The office was completely empty. Paul even said that he was setting up computers while Andrew was giving interviews, which probably was quite distracting.
Oh, I've done solo Vellum
Andrew
a few
himself
times
had
now.
No idea how to even interview someone, and had
I've been able to
Google
do
it.
them for like a
Ron
couple
Ian
months,
was the
or a
first
month and a
Jagex
half, or whatever,
moderator
2 months
ever,
or something.
being the fourth
I just haven't been
official
doing
Jagex
it.
moderator after the brothers themselves.
I haven't been
and he's
playing,
still working
'cause I was
at
upsetty
Jagex today
spaghetti.
as an audio developer. He is the longest-serving Jagex employee.
Oh,
He
yeah, what
says that
happened
in
with
his
that?
interview at the time, though, it was fun.
I just got
because
over it,
all
I
Andrew
guess.
did was ask him to
Yeah.
type something.
Nothing that we
When
can do about
employees
it.
did start, their first task was to build and set up their own desks and computers, as the company didn't have any supplied themselves yet.
I'm probably gonna
By
change all my
Jagex
gear
consisted
to,
of 11 employees,
to
and they
damage
would either
gear so that I
move
can
or
just do
update their
normal
offices
Lomian and
frequently,
Damien for
sometimes
money
even knocking
instead
holes
of
in walls
farming.
and just expanding from there.
So,
holiday events would see a return to the game as well.
if totems are
Five
retarded,
multiple rare items, all of
then I'll
which
just turn all these
would be
drop
worth
items
millions in the
into
future, were released
stat
again.
items. What's
On
the
Easter
point in
and
having
April,
drop
just
items
like
now?
Halloween last year, edible
If
Easter
totems
eggs were
are
dropped around the world
fucka-rude.
this time for players to find, and later in October, red, blue, and green Halloween monster masks were dropped as well, and in December for
Yeah, but the
Christmas,
second set I can
Santa
worry about
hats were
later.
also dropped.
These
In
event
July,
rings
the
are
character
rings are too
categories you could
strong.
choose from when you originally started the game were eventually removed.
If I change everything
On the
to stat
11th of
items, then I'd be able to
September,
kill
the report use button
Lomi
was
and
added to
normal,
make customer
easy
support
peasy,
staff
lemon
members'
squeezy.
jobs easier. 2 weeks later, on the 24th of September, another members-only feature was added, being the King Black Dragon, RuneScape's first ever boss monster. On the same day, Tutorial Island was released for new players as well. At the end of the year, on the 12th of December, the Agility skill was released, and the Carpentry skill was removed. Carpentry had been put into the game this year on the stat menu, but wasn't trainable, yet it did have its own high scores table. It was supposed to be an early form of the construction skill that later released in 2006. Player-owned houses that were going to be associated with the skill were actually in RuneScape Classic at the time on the eastern sides of Falador and Varrock, but the areas were never accessible. The original idea was that these houses were going to be auctioned around amongst the player base, as there weren't enough houses to go around for everyone. Some would have to be homeless, just like in real life. Eventually, the idea was scrapped. Everything was running quite smoothly. Players were enjoying the game, and Jagex was really traction as a proper business. But
listen, Buckaroo. I was gonna do this on November 1st, but you know, you fucking beat me to the punch. Oh, never mind.
A lot by players.
Crawl back to MapleStory. Yeah, crawl back to MapleStory. Yeah. I always come crawling back to MapleStory. Okay.
In RuneScape Classic, you could, and they gave you some attacking bonuses. When you're walking in RuneScape Classic, you won't drop an item until you stop walking. The glitch was done
that's
by
bullshit. I've been playing
knives
this
in your
entire
inventory
time
as you could
practically.
while you were wielding one before you stopped walking. The drop knives attack bonuses would transfer to the one wielded knife for some reason, allowing players to
come crawling back,
monsters
man.
and other players in the wilderness.
MapleStory's a dirty whore.
Using this bug, Jagex made it to where
She has my
players
fucking
would die
cock
instantly
wrapped around her
as they walked
lips.
into the wilderness,
Her
wielding
vicious
only
MapleStory
knives.
lips.
If you had any knives wielded outside of the wilderness, the knives in your inventory would simply just disappear. Another issue
wrapping my
RuneScape
cock
began having
around
was
stuff.
bots. To help combat them, a fatigue system was released into the game on the 13th of November. After performing a certain amount of actions in the game, your fatigue level would reach 100%, and you would be forced to find a bed to sleep in before you could continue playing. Other than some bots, some
MapleStory Virgin versus RuneScape Chad. Yeah, RuneScape, the most Chadly game on the planet. Fucking clicking a button, just watching something happen for a while. Really fucking so epic, dude.
So the newest challenge for Jagex.
Can't believe I'd missed out on that fucking RuneScape gameplay.
Fucking taking off quite successfully, and at the beginning of this year, this was the main area that required their attention the most. Up until this point, everything was done by email. Any players that had any sort of issue would email Jagex with a specific email.
Super cool, dude. Super fucking epic. Super epic fucking gameplay, dude.
Having ranged from a player being stuck somewhere, using items, and simply running them back, wanting to report other players this way instead of using the report use button like they should have, wanting their accounts unbanned or unmuted, sometimes wrongfully so. Pure
You can't beat that sound.
Sometimes, and many more legitimate emails that sometimes got in the way of the legitimate ones. And some were even written by children that were just completely not
That's so realistic.
Just wanted to say hi to a J-mod. This email system for dealing with their customers worked great at first when the game's population was smaller, but over time, absolutely anyone being able to email Jagex at any time proved to be somewhat of a nightmare for the staff, and Andrew was working hard to continue coding a system that might possibly help them sort player issues. Most of the Jagex employees weren't trained in dealing with customer support related issues, so they had to begin hiring people that had experience.
Yeah, Tonga ray guns.
For example, in the beginning,
for real,
there was no way to recover your password if you forgot it. There wasn't even a way for you to try and prove that you were the original owner of your account. Passwords couldn't even be reset because players simply just logged in with usernames at this time, and email addresses weren't associated with players' accounts like they are today. Back then, this feature just didn't exist on the website. Andrew and other programmers at Jagex ended up having to code 20 to 30 different automated systems that each had a different function in relation to handling, filtering, and responding to players' issues and reports that they'd send in by email or through the report of use button. Eventually, after these automated systems were in function, Jagex could relax a little. The secret moderators I spoke of earlier in the years 2000 and 2001
Man,
were
the
eventually
fucking
promoted to regular players, as they were unneeded now due to Jagex acquiring
fucking disorientation
employees
shit,
at their
man.
business. The player Lightning was the last
Oh fuck, I don't think I have any buff
moderator
razors.
to lose his
Oh fuck, I should have
privileges
bought some.
in the summer of this year. The players were still going strong, playing for insane amounts of hours daily. RuneScape now had 5 million registered players this year in October. On the 23rd of March, The Hate was the first player ever to achieve level 99 agility just 4 months after the skills released last year. He was even suspected of botting at the time, but he was really just efficient and played 17 hours a day. 1 week later, on the 30th of March, the player LT Angel was the first to 99 crafting. She was light years ahead of everybody else in the skill, and the reason why was because she had crafted Dragonstone amulets for other players for free.
I'm
since most didn't
retarded.
have high enough crafting at the time to do it
Man, it feels
themselves,
good to be a
making her being able to
retard.
crafting for free herself as well. 8 days
Man,
later,
it feels
on April
so
3rd,
good to be
the
a
player
fucking
Chili Peppers became
retard.
the first to achieve level 99 fletching.
It feels
Another
so
first
good to
99
be a
wasn't
fucking
achieved until 2 months
retard.
later, on the 9th of June, when Halv Noon was the first player
Pretty
ever to reach level 99 Herb Block, known today as Herb Lore. Sadly, TKS's
Okay, this should work, I think.
came to an end this summer in July when she finally quit, overturning the rank to a player Beware of Me.
Oh no!
This run
Okay,
was
good.
short-lived though, as in September
No big.
he was overtaken by Bonebreaker 6, but he also quit
No
as
big.
well, with a total level of 1,625 in December towards the end of the year. Then, the legend himself, Zezima, who began playing in July of
Fucking Zezima.
2001, took rank 1 overall for the first time. Having gotten better at dealing with customer support now, Jagex had begun making some changes to the game based on players' feedback. On the 11th of November, the official RuneScape forums was launched to the public, and Jagex began choosing players to become forum moderators to help with the forum's activity, though they did not have any moderator powers in-game. 2 weeks later, the fatigue system was reduced on the 25th of
Return
November due to a
momentarily.
lot of player complaints. Last year, when you reached 100% fatigue, you would have to find a bed to rest in before doing anything else. There was no run option in RuneScape Classic, everyone walked at the same speed, so sometimes this could mean traveling great distances just to find a bed. So Jagex eventually ended up adding an item called the
Did he do
Sleeping
a
Bag,
sale,
in which you
like,
could click the
immediately,
rest option
or
on
what happened
anywhere
with
you
the
were in world,
250
and you'd
hours?
be brought to a menu where you'd have to enter a CAPTCHA code to begin playing again with 0% fatigue. This actually turned out to be an even better way of combating bots than the original fatigue system was before. Speaking of bots, there was a major bug abuse event this year that took place, and it changed RuneScape's economy forever going forward. A Latvian RuneScape player by the name of Kiteninks would become the most famous bug abuser up until 2006. In Latvian, Kiteninks' name literally means pest or saboteur, one who engages in the act of sabotage. Kiteninks was a creator of a program called AutoRune. AutoRune was the very first scriptable RuneScape bot, and the scripting language was very easy to learn. It was a program that redirected the
days?
RuneScape
That's like
client
10
to
days.
AutoRune itself. It could do everything: auto-walk, auto-fight, auto-fish, auto-mine, and even PK other players. Kiteninks stated that he didn't remember when the first version of the program
Ooh,
came out,
50
but
tier
according
3.
to his internal relay chat client logs, him and another hacker were talking about advertising AutoRune's existence on other websites since
blast it.
2002. Most people believe that Kiteninks' program led to the player 6 feet under duplicating holiday items. That's actually not the case. He never duplicated holiday items, he spawned them. On Kiteninks' old website, within the section of the site concerning his program AutoRune, he says, on November 26, 2003, a player named 6 Feet Under discovered that it could be used for duplicating items. He was trying to trade one of the holiday items using AutoRune by giving server invalid parameters. Ironically, any item in the game could be duplicated except for holiday items and stackable items. So, we were actually just spawning the holiday items, not duping them like everything else, as we didn't even need to own the item we wanted to create or spawn. During AutoRune's popularity peak during this year, thousands of players were using and abusing the program. Thousands of party hats were created, and the other items that were duplicated were worth billions in coins. Not all accounts that abused this bug were banned though. The main item dupers were banned, but some made quite a fortune and were never caught. The items were never deleted, and the game was never rolled back. Jagex stated that a rollback would have been an exaggeration. Kiteninks, along with AutoRune, were never heard from again after the year 2006. But his program that he created will always have an effect on RuneScape until RuneScape dies. He is the reason why tradable holiday items are the prices they are now today in RuneScape 3, some of which are being real-world traded for thousands of real-life dollars still to this day. Even as such a great issue, this bug was still solved by Jagex though in a matter of hours. They were on top of it right away. For the April
Thanks a lot,
Easter egg
Nopals.
this year, drops were
Prime
actually
sub for 4
untradeable,
months.
unlike their predecessors had been.
Really
Bunny
great
games
stuff.
were dropped around this time. 4 months later,
It's,
on August 20th,
it's online
RuneScape's
info show.
50th quest had been released, which was the Legends quest. The last update to the RuneScape
Yeah, that's pretty true,
era would
Nakomi.
be the Halloween
That's
event
pretty
in
real,
October
that's
of
pretty true.
2003, which almost didn't happen. In an update, Jagex asked players to vote in a poll before this holiday event would have been launched. They could choose between 2 options within this poll: delay RuneScape 2's development for a day and
Fucking
go ahead
chicken.
with creating the RuneScape Classic Halloween event, or they could have chose the other option to keep everyone at Jagex working on RuneScape 2, and there would have been a Pancake Day event in February next year instead, whatever that could have possibly meant. The poll ended with 78% of players choosing to delay RS2 so that the untradeable sites would still be dropped. 2 months later, however, when the Christmas holiday event was supposed to come out,
Was it
Andrew
crispy?
wrote an update on the news list
Right.
of the RuneScape website that
Right.
read as follows. This is just a quick note just to say that there aren't going to be any RuneScape items dropped at Christmas. I really don't like having to say this, but I can't see any sensible alternative. This is because the last few drops actually caused a lot of upset and resulted in a huge number of complaints from players who didn't manage to get an item. Many players seem to get really upset about the drop, which is of course the exact opposite of the intended effect. Jagex slowly stopped updating RuneScape Classic after having received a little bit of breathing room once the company was running like a well-oiled machine. During this momentary downtime in the middle of this year, they began working on a whole new project. The technology of the world and the internet was changing. RuneScape, as everyone knew it, was about to receive a huge makeover. Andrew completely rewrote RuneScape's game engine and codebase and began fixing all sorts of things he didn't like about the original version of the game that had been out for the past few years. The scripting language was completely rewritten, and it was far more flexible. Basically, RuneScape was rewritten entirely from scratch. Nothing in the world would ever be 2D again. On December 1st, 2003, the official RuneScape 2 beta was put online for paying members to try out for the very first time. The players and Jagex were apprehensive at first. Jagex didn't know if players would take to this new, shiny version of RuneScape. Jagex knew that some of their players' entire lives revolved around RuneScape every single day, and they were very mindful of that fact. So, the old game RuneScape 1 now would be known as RuneScape Classic, and would be kept online at the time, just in case, and this new version of RuneScape would be called RuneScape 2. When the beta launched, players had their RuneScape Classic stats copied over to this new version of the game, but their quest history and items were not copied over. You basically started out with nothing, except your stats you
I'm still new to this whole Twitch thing. What is that timer and $1 sub thing on the screen?
Initially,
so Pepperwuss, this is called a subathon, and the timer is the amount of hours that I have to stay online.
Over this period of time, there was, needless to say,
and every time someone donates $1 in any way, the time goes up by 60 seconds. So if someone subscribes, which is $4.99 or $5, the time goes up by 5 minutes. If someone gives 100 bits, the time goes up by 1 minute, and if someone gives $1 on PayPal, the time goes up by 1 minute. And
from RuneScape Classic for the last time, including items
the timer goes up,
histories now, along with fixing
and then it ticks down,
as well.
And then it goes up again, and then it ticks down again.
The entire RuneScape 2 beta was no longer.
It just sort of goes until it doesn't.
Only, and all free players.
It goes.
This new shiny version of RuneScape was mostly well received by the community.
Yes, a scam. It's essentially a scam. It's a big scam.
Most people moved on to RuneScape 2.
It's a big old scammerino
that made playing easier and more enjoyable. You no longer had to remain in combat until you and your opponent hit each other 3 times.
No problem, Pepperwuss.
Escape. You could do any of that whenever you wanted now. The combat triangle was implemented, so what you wore now had an effect on how successful you were when using melee, magic, or ranged combat. For example, you couldn't always cast spells successfully anymore if you were wearing full rune armor, which is something you could do in RuneScape Classic. Decaying became more about skill instead of chance, and all the monsters were reworked to give you more experience when fighting them. The combat formula's experience points.
They released World Cup Soccer on Pinball FX. Can you believe it? That sounds pretty crazy, Janice, but I do believe you.
That's epic.
Whatever, Blanny. You don't even fucking care about pinball anymore, so shut the fuck up.
No, I've played World Cup.
Don't even pretend to give a shit about P-ball.
That's one of my favorite tables.
You know, because someone didn't even fucking play P-ball this Friday, so. You know, me and Janice don't fuck with P-ball imposters.
That's good to hear that you.
We fuck with real P-ball heads. Only real P-ball heads. Am I right, Janice, or am I correct? Don't pit Pinball Family against each other. That's rule number 1. Well, I'm not the one who betrayed Pinball Family on Friday, huh?
This was later done away with, removing the sleeping bags and fatigue as a whole, replacing them with random events.
Shut the fuck up. You don't know anything.
I'm not the one who betrayed Pinball Trust on Friday, huh?
Am I right?
Am I right, J-Man, or what? Am I right, J-Man, or what?
The equipment status menu was added alongside the inventory.
Man, he's not even
making
there.
wielding items in your inventory.
He's probably sleeping.
Don't do this to me. Answer the question, man. It's simple.
On the 25th of March, the duel arena was added, and players could now stake their items.
So only say something if you've been talking shit behind my back.
Answer the question, man.
Crafting skill was also released, and with it, Zesma's reign as rank 1 from 2003 until now.
I heard what you said. My friend Dal Stars was very confused about some words you had to say
As
about my
Zezma
ex
officially began
and
training the
being a
skill in a matter
MILF
of days,
or something
Zezma
with
retook the rank
kids.
from him.
What?
On May 17th, Lil Yuffie88
Apparently
became the
you'd
first player
said something
ever
on
to reach
stream
level
without
99
me
rank.
watching,
Next month,
and my
on the 14th
friend
of June,
in real
player
life
moderators
was
were
very
added to the game,
confused
and
because
14
I hadn't
players were chosen
updated
to
him on the
receive the status.
situation.
Player moderators
What?
now have silver crowns next to
Yeah.
their
Anything I would have said on
usernames.
stream is something that
Jagex
everyone would have already
gold
known
crown
anyway.
next to theirs. Along with this update, Jagex released a section to the RuneScape website that normal players could not access.
Let me read what he's a very
Player
confused
moderator
person,
section.
okay, so
Contact
take this with a
Jmods
grain of
directly.
salt. He
July would
says,
become a big month for RuneScape 2. It was during this month that a series of hidden updates were released by Jagex that made the game look a bit
he
more
was
polished
outside
than it
smoking a
originally was
cigarette and
after
got
the
back
beta
inside
first
when you were
launched.
saying
Although
you were at the end of
vegetation around the game
saying
was
something.
changed over time,
All I
item
heard
sprites
Toad
received a
say
massive
was
overhaul, changing the way
a
most items in the
misunderstanding
inventory
of a
look,
kid
and the
that
entire
isn't
game
yours
frame
and something
itself
about
was
an
updated to
X.
look a little less thicker than it
What?
originally was. The game frame wouldn't be updated again
Yeah,
until 2007.
there was a mention
It was
of your
also
name,
this
a
time in the
MILF,
month of
and a
July
kid that
that
isn't
signed
yours.
a
MILF.
business deal with a third-party website.
I think your friend might be
called
confused.
Mintflip is a
He
popular
might be
website
He,
interpolating.
I told you, he is a confused person.
Might be
but
interpolating information here.
It does sound like
Advertised
something you
on
might
this
say.
website, and it tripled their player base. Very
Doesn't
quickly
sound
because of
familiar.
this. Jagex's account creation system on the RuneScape website actually couldn't handle all the amounts of players that were trying to register.
Damn,
and the
this
system
video is
eventually
gonna go for
crashed.
100
Modmark
hours.
even stated that he
The
could
video's
remember
2.5
having a
hours long.
conversation with Andrew in which he almost decided to completely stop account creation for the time being at this time. On the 7th of September, the PVM community received a huge update, a brand new boss
shit.
monster being the Cowfight Queen, RuneScape's second ever boss. Along with the Cowfight Queen's release, Dragon Chain
God, I
Bodies
hate this
were
fucking
also
stupid
introduced into the
boss.
game. They were worth millions and became one of the most sought-after pieces of equipment in the game at this time. 8 days later, on September 15th, Kale still became the first player ever to achieve level 99 rune crafting, just 6 months after the skill had been released. 12 days later, on the 27th of September, because of all the downtime Jagex had after being so successful recently, Ian Gower decided to create the X option on item menus. Up until this point, if you were going to withdraw from or deposit anything into your bank, you had to either withdraw or deposit 1, 5, 10, or all of whatever that item was. When it came to cooking food, you had to do it one by one, so this X option update from Ian was a very big quality of life update for the players. Only one holiday event happened this year due to the release of RuneScape 2, and it was the Christmas event. An NPC called Santa handed out yo-yos to everyone that talked to him in Round
Yo-yos.
Square. To this day, it was the least thought out holiday event in RuneScape that ever existed. RuneScape's last major update of this year took place on the 13th of December, being Castle Wars, a player versus player capture the flag-like minigame in which 2 teams of players fought against each other as one player went for the other castle's flag and returned it to their base. It was a major hit with players and is still seen today as something very fun and nostalgic to do if you're ever bored in RuneScape. Going back to what I spoke of earlier, Jagex did have a lot of downtime during this year. The Gower Brothers company was so successful during this year, and their staff had grown in size. Because of this, Andrew and CEO Constant Tedder wanted to reward their staff somehow. Constant devised a foolproof idea. A jolly system in which the staff would be rewarded when certain business milestones would be hit, such as a certain number milestone of membership subscriptions they received from players. In short, the staff would have little mini vacations together as a group. They'd do things like drive speedboats, go go-karting, go paintballing, and a lot of other fun events were set up. Mod Cluffy recounts that at one point, 4 or 5 jollies would be stacked up on top of each other just because of the rate of speed that the company would be hitting these milestones. Multiple targets would be hit weekly, but when the jollies were written, they'd expect them to be months apart, not weeks. Andrew had even stated that some members of staff came up to him and said that they hadn't done a full 5-day week at Jagex since starting because of the amount of jollies being taken every week. 2004
Amount of
was
jollies.
an all-around great year for RuneScape and Jagex, and for me. Shortly after the RuneScape 2 beta
End
was released
stream?
to free
That's pretty cool,
players,
Josh.
10
Maybe I
years
will.
old, I discovered this great game and created my account Moplox too.
Snoop Dogg is live. Man, how come I didn't think about Snoop? Oh, man.
This year opened up with a simple yet fun update. On
Can't believe I'm so
January 5th of this
selfish.
year, the chat effects were
Snoop
added,
has to be
such as
crushed
flow,
by this
slide,
Aaron Carter
wave, and
news, man.
flash. These chat effects are still heavily used to this day in
That's
OSRS
how I beat
and
Shaq.
RS3. In the same month, on the 26th of January, the Slayer skill released. Prior to the Slayer skill, there wasn't much in the way of variety when it came to killing monsters around RuneScape during this time. This skill meant that players could now
streaming the
have to
code with
explore
the
parts
loss
of
of
the
his
map they
friend.
never had before, such as places like the desert and the Slayer Tower, when it came to killing these new monsters. On the 2nd of February, the Roving Elves quest was released, furthering the player's exploration of the Outlands to the west, and along with this quest's release, 2 new best-in-slot items were added, being the Crystal Bow and the Crystal Shield. 20 days later, Lumbridge and Draenor received graphical updates. Here's what Lumbridge used to look like, and this is what it changed into. Jagex wanted a more welcoming look in Lumbridge due to players starting their journey.
I can do the
Drainer,
colors
the
right now.
Wizard's Tower Bridge had been straightened.
Or, well,
On
I mean,
March
I can't do it
22nd,
alone,
the
but
Easter event released.
I could go to
During
colors.
the event, players were given a basket of eggs and would have to hand them out to other players. Their reward would be a rubber chicken that they could whack other players with. On April 4th, 2005, the Dragon Scimitar special attack was
Nah, I
changed.
don't think I can do it
Originally,
solo.
the
I don't think I'm
special
strong
attack
enough.
would drain other players' run energy completely when
If I
used
change
on
my
them.
items, I
It
could
was
probably do
changed
it.
because it was obviously overpowered.
If I got rid of all the
Today,
drop and
Dragon
miss, so
Scimitar
shit.
special attack removes your opponent's
I could probably
ability
do it.
to use overhead prayers for 5 seconds. April would also come to be the month that the desert received a lot
That's okay.
of
I'm not too
content.
worried about getting it every
Previously,
day.
there was really no need for players to venture out into the desert. The biggest piece of desert content that was added was the Desert Treasure Quest on April 18th. For the longest
I have light
time,
rum,
this
tonic
quest
water,
was
orange
known
juice,
as the
Coca-Cola,
hardest quest
Coca-Cola
in
Zero
RuneScape
Sugar.
to
What's the best
complete.
drink I can
With
make?
the release of this quest, players
Rum and
received
Coca-Cola,
an
man.
ancient magic spell
Or
book
rum and
that
orange juice is
became
pretty good.
much more deadlier because of the spell Ice Barrage, but it was great for Elf Mage Kids
Would
Ranging
mix
on
rum and,
IP playing videos on YouTube.
And tonic water.
On May 9th, 2005, the Barrows minigame was released. Previously, the Combat Triangle's best-in-slot armor consisted of Rune and Dragon for melee, Black
Just
Dragon
drink
Hide
the
for
rum,
range,
dude.
Coke and tonic
for
water. Good
magic.
drink.
The Barrow's armor was seen as rare amongst players, and it was exciting when you saw somebody wearing a piece. At the end of this month, on May 31st, the female player models received an upgrade. Before this update, they basically used the same player model as males did, only, you know, they had boobs. They weren't very feminine looking in the slightest, and a lot of female players had requested
Dude, who the
this
fuck
to
drinks
be
rum and
changed.
eat?
On June 13th, the Rune Crafting Abyss was released, making training the skill much easier when it came to traveling to the rune's specific altars. On July
Orange
9th,
juice and
2005,
tonic
the legend
water
himself,
and a
Desmond,
splash of
achieved
Coke
not
Zero.
only level 99 Slayer
Says,
first before
905
anybody, but with this
wreck.
99 had also achieved a max
One of my
skill total
faves.
level of 1,000.
A little bit of orange
making him the
ton
first player
Coke.
ever to become maxed. On July 11th, the farming skill was released. Here's a picture that many people might have forgotten about or never knew about. This is what the login screen looked like when farming was released. This was the first time that the login screen itself had ever been changed since the release of RS2. On August 8th, 2003, RuneScape Classic officially closed. The only way you could play this version of RuneScape anymore during this time was that you had to have been an original RuneScape Classic player up until this point of its closure. On the 9th of September, the player 0xpx0 achieved level 99 farming first, just 2 months after the skill had been out. 10 days later, on September 19th, bank pins were released, furthering account security if you happened to be hacked. On September 26th, Port Sarim, Remington, and some of ToadGoes area had all received graphical upgrades. These graphical upgrades mainly consisted of the Port Sarim docks and the surrounding trees and other vegetation within the regions being changed. It was also during this year that other areas in RuneScape received graphical upgrades as well. For example,
Dune doesn't
Barbarian
drink
Village
piss.
was changed into what it looks like today,
Well,
shortly before the year 2006.
Dune might drink piss.
Around the same time, Falador also
I don't
received
know.
an upgrade. It used to be gray instead of white. September 26th also brought a whole new look to the RuneScape website. It received a graphical layout similar to the way old school RuneScape's website looks today. On October 4th, 2005, the Czar fight
silence
was
is
released,
deafening.
and along with them,
True.
a brand new boss monster. That monster was Jad at a combat level of 702. And if you killed him after having survived 62 waves of other monsters, you received the brand new best in slot cape, being a fire cape. This was seen as a major achievement. Some players still can't kill Jad today. Before the Fire Cape's release, the Legends Cape was the best in slot cape. This month of October was quite a successful year for Jagex. Players were enjoying the game, loving the new content being put out by Jagex, and they received an investment from a business called Insight Venture Partners. Insight was a business that invested in other businesses similar to Jagex that developed online software, games, and other internet-based technology. The month of October ended with the release of the 2005 Halloween event that occurred on October 31st. During the event, non-aggressive zombies could have been found in Lumbridge Swamp. The zombies had an insult option. If you insulted them, the zombie would take off its head and throw it at the player. If the player caught the head,
kinda
it would be
rude.
theirs to keep. The zombie head could also be talked to or held up in the air as an item-triggered emote. Other zombies had a scare option. If you scared them, they'd break apart and put themselves back together, and it would scare you, the player, ultimately giving you the scared emote for the first time. This event also marked the first time ever that the Grim Reaper would visit players when they died in-game. The last update of the year 2005 was the Christmas event that began on December 19th. During the event, players could help Diego run his Christmas workshop, making decorations that would later be used to decorate a giant Christmas tree in the center of Varrock. You could also find imps running around across RuneScape with decorations as well, and you could shake them to steal the imps' decorations. After decorating the tree, you would complete the event and be rewarded with different colored hats, scarves, and 3 marionette puppets. On the 1st of January this year, a player by the name of XXX Neo XXX7 was the first player ever to achieve 200 mil XP in a skill. That skill was fletching. On January 12th, over 5,000 RuneScape Classic accounts were banned by JagX. RuneScape Classic wasn't being as monitored as closely as it once was due to RuneScape 2 becoming the main game version that people played. Because of this, bots were overwhelming RuneScape Classic, even though the game had already been closed to new players by this time. 1 week later, on the 19th of January, over 15,000 RuneScape 2 accounts were banned for macroing as well. These 2 instances of mass deletions of accounts marked the beginning of a long battle against bots that JagX would have to take on during later years. On January 20th, the player Eve340 was the first player ever to reach 200 mil cooking XP. On January 22nd, 2006, Zesma achieved 500,000 XP overall, being the first player to ever do so. On the 20th of February, RuneScape received another boss monster that had a combat level of 305. That boss was the Chaos Elemental. Along with this boss monster's release, a new dragon weapon was added to the drop table, being the Dragon Two-Hander Sword, which was highly sought after and worth a lot of money during this time. The King Black Dragon's lair is found within the wilderness, but the KBD itself isn't actually in wilderness territory within its lair, so the release of the Chaos Elemental boss marks the first time players ever received a boss that could be found in the actual wilderness. On March 7th, the Giant Mole was released underneath Falador as well. On March 15th, JagX added RuneScape's 100th quest, which was Recipe for Disaster, and for the first time, players received a new best-in-slot pair of melee gloves, being the Barrows gloves. Prior to the Barrows gloves release, the best melee gauntlets that you could obtain was the Steel gauntlets after the completion of the Family Crest quest. It was also during this month in March that the player The Old Knight had officially maxed his RuneScape Classic account, being the first RSC player to ever do so. Unfortunately, 1 month after this in April, he passed away due to colon cancer. In honor of his death and fame within the game, JagX kindly placed this hill and grave in the wilderness. On April 10th, the forum moderators and JagX moderators' posts on the forums became more distinguishable. On the same day, the 2005 Easter event had released. After completing the event, players received the item Easter Ring. When it was worn, it would turn the player into an Easter egg. 8 days later, on April 18th, the popular minigame Pest Control was released, along with Void Knight armor, which became to be popular transitions from Dragonhide or Barrows armor when it came to training melee, range, or magic. On April 27th, JagX had announced that RuneScape had passed a new record, being that 197,000 players were all online at once. On May 31st, 2006, the construction skill was released. Before this skill, players had to wander around RuneScape with no real area that they could call their own. Player-owned houses was a very exciting update for the players, having been anticipated by them as far back as 2002. This update, of course, though, would bring on one of the most infamous bugs in RuneScape history. On June 6, 2006, otherwise known as 666, the player Cursed You achieved level 99 construction before anybody else due to the money he gained from staking in the Duel Arena. Because of this, he held a very public house party at the Remington House Portal on World 111. His house was huge, and being the first to 99 was far more progressed than any other player's house in the game. Due to the massive amounts of players inside his house, the lag became completely unbearable, and Cursed You was forced to kick all players from his house. Some players were partaking in combat-related activities inside the house though, and when they were kicked, they found out that they still had the ability to attack other players while being outside of the wilderness. Numerous players abused the bug, but only one level 115 player named Duriel321 took it a little further by ice barraging multiple people in Falador. What little footage that was filmed of this event focused on this player alone, and because of it, Duriel321 went down in history as the main abuser of the bug. Cursed You, the owner of the house, was later banned on August 25th, 2006, 2 months later, for real-world trading. This event became known.
What is Blandon doing? I don't know. Probably
Massacre,
touching
and
himself
became
or
so
like looking at his
infamous
goatee
that
or
Jagex
something.
has even
Nice.
stated that the events of this day were canon.
What are you
to
shaping
Runescape.
his soul
Dyson
patch?
Sphere Project and
Shaping
making
his soul
spicy
patch?
chicken
I don't
sandwich.
know.
September and the year 169
Musking his
of the
soul
fifth
patch?
age.
I don't
In
know.
RuneScape 3, there's even a memorial plaque of
Sounds
this
likely to
in
me,
Falmouth
man.
Park, dedicated to all those that perished at the hands of Duriel. 5 days after the Falador massacre took place, on June 11th,
Right, making a project for the
2006,
science fair.
player
That sounds like
Nobelife
something.
officially passed
That
Zezima
sounds like something
and
Planet would
ranked
actually
one
do.
overall on the high scores after gaining
Making a
level
project
99
for the science,
construction
tinkering on a
this
circuit
day.
board,
He was also the first player
making
ever
a project
to
for the
reach
science fair.
2,178 total level, being maxed.
You know, being
On
a
June
little
12th, The
bitch.
next day, the Warriors Guild was released.
You know.
Next month,
I
on
dream of
July,
being
the
cool enough to
Stronghold of
tinker on a
Security was
circuit board.
released.
Regular
On August
Blandon
29th,
behavior.
all giants, dragons,
I have
and
circuit
demons
bent
received
a
graphical
small
upgrades
keyboard
and new
once. That's
sounds.
as far
This
as
was
I've
the
gone.
first time NPCs ever received any graphical upgrades since the launch of RuneScape 2. So this was a very controversial update amongst players at the time. I personally
I think I
prefer
followed
the older
instructions
sounds and
for it.
models. On September 27, the Lumbridge Home Teleport spell was released for new players that wanted to make their way back to Lumbridge if they got lost. On October 18th, skill
Well, if we
tapes
live
were
together, you
released,
could be my
but
number one
until
solder
this time, there
guy.
was no way for players to show off their level 99s other than the high scores until these capes came out. These skill capes also came with specific emotes. The players that already had 99s
He's
got
a
these capes immediately,
soldering.
and lower levels that
I
followed
do
them
love
around
soldering.
asked
He's an
for emote
ottering.
plots, meaning they wanted to see the skill cape emotes. This is where I got my username from. On
He's a
October
ring ding
30th,
ring
the
ka-ching.
2006 Halloween event was released, and players
Aha,
that completed it got a
cha-ching,
skeleton
baby.
costume and
Let's
a
keep it
pumpkin
smooth,
mask. On
smooth
November
like a couple of
21st,
babies.
RuneScape received its 23rd skill, being Hunter, my favorite skill. In the same update, the icons on the game frame and the
Should have
stat
considered a
menu
tier 3
were
package
also
where
updated.
one lucky
Less than
viewer
2
gets to
weeks
stay in the
later,
toad
player
department
Dark Force
in the corner
67
silently
achieved
during the
level 99
subathon where they
Hunter
dance
first
cap
before
on.
anybody. This year
I don't think I
ended
want any
with the
strangers in
2006
my
Christmas
home
event,
for
in
any
which
amount of
players
time.
received a reindeer hat
Ever.
for completing it. The Gower brothers will
Especially
work
not someone
around
who's sitting there wearing a
32 million
dunce cap.
pounds this year.
Some
This year
weird
would have also
brooding
been
freak.
considered by
Yeah,
many
Nick with
RuneScape's
AIDS.
peak.
Yeah, Nick with AIDS. Fucking psychotic freak Nick with AIDS.
This year would be the year that everything changed.
I won that.
RuneScape featured
You're
John
not just a
becoming very,
strange
very
viewer.
popular, and more players began
But you are
documenting the
strange.
game's history as it unfolded. Jagex this year would become rank 59th in the Sunday Times article 100 Best Small
I will never
Companies
bring
to
back the Nick
Work
with
For.
AIDS channel.
On January 4th of this year, the
We
Barbarian
cannot
Assault
legally
Team
bring
game
that
got
back.
released, giving players a new best-in-slot plate body other than Barrel's armor, which was the fighter torso. Exactly 1 month later, on February 4th, a 14
There are no bugs on my floor.
On World 28.
There are no
Riot
bugs on the
occurred
floor.
Due to a popular RuneScape YouTuber
There were bugs a
named
while
Eric
ago, but
Wolfman
there's no
being
bugs
muted.
anymore.
He was muted for luring other players
there's no
into
bugs in the
wilderness
carpet.
to film his videos.
I do not
2
have
days
carpet
later, on
bugs.
February 6th, the Fremenic Isles quest was released, placing the islands Nadisnot and Yatizo into the game, as well as giving players a new best-in-slot helmet, being the Nadisnot helmet. On Valentine's Day on February 14th, RuneScape released dedicated German servers. On March 20th,
Can we get a bathroom
all
update
chickens,
at some
cows,
point
and
in
rabbits
during
had
the
their
next
graphical
251
appearances
hours?
upgraded.
Sure.
On April 18th, the Wilderness Gates was
Last time I
released
went to the
with attempts
bathroom
stop
was to
players
take a
from marrying
shower.
each other. On May 1st, Jagex posted an update on the main page
No
about
bowel
bots and
or
real-world trading.
urinary
It
movements of
began
any kind, I
mentioning
don't
bots and
think.
real-world trading
Not that I can
more
recall.
during this time, listing off statistics for players to read about how many accounts they were
I
actually
will give you an
banned each
update
week.
next
At
time
one
I
point
go
in
to the
time,
bathroom.
It was made clear that they were
I want to
banning
go in.
8,000 accounts weekly for breaking these rules.
Come on,
On
man.
May 4th,
Uber
RuneScape
Eats
achieved
counter
a
slash,
world record for having reached 1 million
what is it?
membership
What's toily?
subscriptions.
Oh, toily
On May
count-
8th,
toilet
the small
counter.
spiders,
Uber
alpines,
Eats
the
counter.
scorpions, and the metal dragons also received
It's
graphical
there's nothing to get
updates.
delivered
With
right now.
graphical
There's a
updates
snowstorm.
becoming the new norm. It was only fitting that eventually it
There's a
carried
snowstorm.
into
Can't even
rich
get anything
cities.
delivered right now.
On May 29, 2007, Varrock and all of its NPCs changed forever and received a massive graphical upgrade. This will be RuneScape's
I'm lucky I got
biggest
winter
makeover
supplies.
yet for any city for the first time. Because of this change, 4 days later on June 2nd, more
I do not need to defer
World
Booger.
65 and 66, and it caused RuneScape's very
That
first
dude who delivered the
entire
apple pies
server
can make it through the
blackout.
storm.
On a lighter
Dude,
note,
that
on June
was,
13th this month, Zezima became the first
when
player
was that?
ever to
That was
reach
not a
1
subathon.
billion total XP overall. On June 26th,
That was,
RuneScape's game engine was updated.
That was only a
and
few
an
months
entirely
ago.
New game frame was implemented.
I'm pretty sure it was
The
a
main
spring
game
by
frame
then.
that we all know today in old school RuneScape. On July 24th,
It just started
was
snowing.
officially
There was a
the
massive
most
snowstorm last
populated
night.
City being Falador.
The whole-
Next month on August 6th, Clan Chat was released. Before Clan
The-
Chat,
the whole
players only
fucking
way to
place is
communicate
covered
with
in
each other
snow.
was through private
I don't know if you'll be able to
messages,
see
so
it,
this
but
was
I can
actually
try and
seen as
show
a
you.
pretty great update. 4 days later, on August 10th, Jagex saved a copy of this 2007 version of RuneScape and deleted any older version of the game forever. This is why Old School RuneScape's revision is the revision that it is. It's the RuneScape's revision. At the beginning was a revision of August 10th, 2007. August 28th, the God Wars dungeon was released, bringing loads of new armor and weapons into the game. On the 18th of September, the ZMI
I know what I can
was
do.
released.
Oh, pipe it down, you're trying to watch
This
RuneScape?
crafting's
Oh, shut the
original
fuck
max
up.
XP per hour rate from 25k to 50k. On October 2nd, another city received a major graphical upgrade, being Edgeville. On October 23rd,
I'm not gonna do stretches.
2007, after being with Jagex for 5 years and implementing many great updates, Constant Tedder unfortunately resigned from being CEO at Jagex, and he was replaced by a man named Jeff Idison. On November 5th, the Assist system was released. This system allowed other players to give XP bonuses to their friends while they were training. On November 11th, the skills interface was upgraded again, and it went from this to this. On November 26th, the Grand Exchange was released northwest of
Select
Veroth,
each
West
image
Bay.
containing a cup
This
of
was
coffee.
a massive change to the way trading was done in RuneScape. Player interaction was no longer needed, and merchanting clans became very popular very fast. A lot of players liked the GE, and a lot of players hated the GE. The update was extremely controversial. December unfortunately started off in a bad way, and it only got worse from there for both
Shitty hair.
Real-world trading of bots had only gotten worse. Sometimes
You wish you
it
could grow
seemed
hair
as if
like
bots
mine.
had taken
Trust
over
me.
entire cities. Bots
You
at
wish
this
you could
point
grow
in
hair
time
like mine,
made
buddy.
up about 30% of RuneScape's
Reminder.
player
I'm sorry that you have a
base.
receding
Tips.
hairline and you don't
Activities,
have
gold
fucking
farmers began
actual hair
stealing
coming out of
players'
your head.
credit card numbers. They would then use these stolen credit card numbers to make RuneScape member accounts. to
Trust me,
farm gold on.
you wish you
Players
could grow hair
quickly
like mine,
began
buddy.
realizing that their cards were being
Trust me.
stolen and
You
used.
wish
Banks
you could grow
began
hair like
returning
mine.
thousands of
You
real-world
wish you
dollars
had hair
to
like
players
this.
that had their private
Trust me.
information stolen in this way, and it caused some serious problems.
You
for
don't have
Jagex
fucking
with
hair like
real-life
this.
banks. The banks began thinking that
It's
Jagex
okay,
was
man.
behind all
It's
this stolen
fine,
money
you know?
that was being refunded to people.
It's fine that you
Jagex's
don't have hair
company
like this.
almost
It's no
wasn't
big,
allowed
you
to be
know?
able to accept
Not
credit
everybody
card
can look
payments
good
anymore
like
because
me.
of this.
Yeah.
Paul Gower stated that if that had happened, they would have
Yeah,
really
it's
been
online
screwed as a
information.
business, because if there's no Jagex, there would be no RuneScape. In RuneScape's 15th
Well, it's
year
cold in here.
anniversary
Oh,
documentary,
Boogie.
Andrew recounted
Get away
these
from the
times,
window,
stating
Boogie.
these
You're gonna
exact
catch a
words.
cold.
It got to the point where we were like, there's only two ways that we could possibly tackle this. We could either A, start selling the item ourselves, because that would basically dry up the gold farmers' markets and they would have no financial incentive to keep breaking our countermeasures, or we could do something really radical, which could completely break it, which is restricting trades. So, on the 12th of December 2007, Jagex had announced that they were going to make a decision that they didn't take lightly at all, and that they were going to begin adding a trade limit at the beginning of next year. On the same day of this announcement, the Wilderness received a massive update. The Wilderness Volcano, Bounty Hunter, and Clan Wars were put into the game. Along with this update, the Duel Arena, for the first time ever, was changed to free-to-play. Ending this year on a lighter note, though, the player who had originally achieved level 99 Herb Lore before anybody else back in 2003 finally achieved 200 mil XP overall in the skill before anyone else as well. The player was Halv New, so it essentially took him 5 years to achieve this.
I'm a fucking idiot. What?
On January 2nd of this year, trading and staking would never be the same again. They were now capped, limited by the amount of quest points
Shut
you
up,
had on your
booger.
account. If you hadn't completed any of the quests,
You're
you
so
could only
extra.
trade and stake within a limit of 3,000 coins. If you had completed all the quests, your limit you could work within then was 25,000 coins. Merchanting was significantly harder, and gift giving became a thing of the past.
What?
It was also during this year of the month that, because of these controversial updates and the massive amount
What,
of hate that
booger?
came with them,
What?
Jagex had to completely remove the rant section on the RuneScape
stinker.
forums. Shortly after this, they also removed the compliments section as well, because all the hate just spilled over into that forum too. On January 15th, the summoning skill was released, and along with it, another new version
Oh,
of RuneScape's
fuck,
game
man.
frame
No,
and
no,
stat
no, no,
menu.
no.
For the first time in RuneScape's history, the stat menu had received a scroll bar. Summoning would also, unfortunately, mark the day that the Zezima era came to an end in RuneScape. On Zezima's original YouTube channel, Zezima0213, he had posted a message that stated,
Man,
I have
fuck,
stopped
this
playing
is so
RuneScape
dumb.
competitively because it's
Hate
getting
fucking Discord.
progressively
It's more
easier
like
over
Pisscord.
time. With it getting easier to train skills and gain XP, I've lost a sense of accomplishment and what I've worked hard to achieve since I started in 2001. If things will continue to get easier, it ruins the game for those of us who have been here since the beginning. 11 days later, on January 26th, the player Syzygy became the first ever maxed free-to-play account. On February 8th, the player Nikishlade achieved level 99 summoning first.
I just logged
After
myself out of
Zesma
Discord
had
like a
left the high
fucking
scores,
retard.
Players Green098, Yoga-Sun, and King Duffy 1 battled it out for rank 1 overall, but it was later King Duffy 1 who obtained and kept the rank for a while until he was beaten by Gert Jars. March wasn't too bad of a month for 2008, though. On March 5th, Jagex released a new website with loads of games on it called FunOrb. The two most popular games on the website at the time would come to be Arcanists and Armies of Gielinor. A lot of players actually switched from RuneScape to this website to play these games because they were so fun. Man, I miss Arcanists. On April 9th, the Fist of Guthix minigame was released. On May 8th, Jagex posted an update on the
so
RuneScape's
difficult.
homepage titled An Image of the Future. This
Life-
news post would mark the beginning of many more to
Life
come within
is
the next few months,
hard.
depicting a brand new version of RuneScape in which it featured high detailed graphics. This was huge and pretty exciting, and the community had loads of questions. Not everybody was pleased, but players who supported and didn't support this update alike were filled with much anticipation in its release regardless. This would become one of the biggest updates in RuneScape's history, furthering the sad times of a lot of things coming to an end in RuneScape. Ashley Miller, otherwise known as Fatback, a very popular RuneScape video maker at this time, unfortunately passed away due to heart failure. In this same month, on May 21st, Quick Chat was released, giving permanently muted players a way to finally speak to other players around them, other than using emotes as they had previously. On July 1st, a members-only beta launch of RuneScape HD had finally gone live. RuneScape also received major graphical changes among a lot of cities because of this. On July 14th, RuneScape HD had
Yeah, it was just stupid. I had to
fully
reset the
been released to all
password, and then
players.
when I reset the
On same
password, it
day of
logged me out of my
RuneScape
Discord on my
HD's launch,
PC.
The tutorial island was
And
removed,
who
it was
got
replaced by a
scooped?
new tutorial
Boogie got
called Learning the
scooped.
Ropes that was featured
Nice.
on the quest menu. Players didn't really take to this new tutorial, however, and they missed
careful,
Tutorial
Bobby.
Island since it had been in the game since RuneScape Classic. Because of this, a few months later, Learning the Ropes was removed and Tutorial Island was put back into the game. Also on the same day of these updates, the item lending system had been put into the game for players that were still upset about the trade restrictions. On August 22nd, Jagex had achieved another Guinness World Record, being given the title Most Popular MMORPG. On September 15th, the Corporal Beast boss monster was released, and along with it, its sigils and its shields. The Divine Spirit Shield was actually
that was
worth
like
1
overnight or
billion
whatever.
gold when it first released, making it the first item ever to
And,
be just as expensive as rare holiday
No one has their
items.
snow tires on
October
or anything,
15th,
and everything's all
PvP
fucked
Worlds
up.
were released
My
in an
balcony's
effort to
covered in
bring PvP
snow.
back to life since the removal
All the
of
shit I had in the
wilderness
balcony's all
earlier
covered in
the year.
snow.
On November 11th, the very popular Stealing Creation minigame was released. On November
All
26th,
the boxes
RuneScape
on
received its
your
first
balcony.
Grand
No,
Master
boxes are
quest
gone,
ever,
except for the
being
TVs.
Wild Gothic
Those are still
Slaves.
there.
With the release of this quest,
Tonight, yeah,
Dragon
that was
Plate
like
Bodies
this
and
morning.
Dragon Claws were
Yeah.
released into the game as well. Dragon
I don't
Claws
think it was
changed
snowing
the
today,
game
but that was
a
this
lot,
morning.
especially when it came to rushing other players, and the Dragon Plate Body was highly sought after when it released. Due
Hey,
to
went to
having
that
been
church? That church has been
anticipated
under
ever since the
construction since I
Dragon
got
Chain
here,
Body came
I
out in
think.
2004. On December 11th,
It might be
RuneScape
open now.
released French servers.
Be
You
cool
can
to
now
go,
play
maybe.
RuneScape on English, German,
pretty close.
and French worlds. Something didn't quite seem right about Jagex this year amongst the players. For the first time in RuneScape history, RuneScape was facing an issue that it had never faced before. A decline.
Winter's
in its
gonna be
player
heinous
base.
this year?
There were exactly
Yeah.
15
Winter's
updates
heinous
throughout
every
this
year in
whole
fucking
year that had to
Saskatoon.
do with payment options and updates on how you could pay Jagex for membership subscriptions. It seemed as if Jagex was.
I thought the
very
view would be
much
more
worried about
avant-garde,
money and
industrial,
profits
homeless
this year on the
warehouse.
newsfeed to a lot of players,
Uh,
something they
yeah.
hadn't been all about.
It's
in the
pretty,
years before. Or if they
there's
were,
not really
they
much going
hadn't
on
been
here.
so public about it, at least, like they were during all of 2008.
There's a lot
In
of
fact, the very
warehouse
last update
shit.
of this year on December 19th.
There's not really
was
much
Jagex
downtown in
announcing
general
that
in
you
this
can now
shithole
pay
place.
for membership on FunOrb and RuneScape via SMS.
Will be especially heinous once the Dirty Bomb false flag event occurs.
Changed from 90 seconds to 5 minutes on January
Stadium.
15th. On January
Cobalt
27th,
45.
an update was released
Crowd.
to allow players to filter their magic spells and teleport.
National
On February
Convention.
9th, another update was posted by Jagex
Gun,
titled
rifle,
The
pistol,
World of
Idaho.
RuneScape. Within this update, it was explained that
NRA,
Jason was resigning as
ANCAP,
Jagex's
Libertarian,
CEO,
eco-fascist,
and was replaced by a man named Mark Gerhard,
Depleted
otherwise known
uranium.
as Mod MMG.
Cessna
The interview
plane
was
with
published
payload.
after Edison's departure, in which MMG
Cool.
gave his speculation.
Cessna
as to
plane
just
full of
why he
depleted
resigned.
uranium
The quote
payload.
by Mark was as follows: "The problem was
Stadium.
a year or so ago, there was Let me
Dirty
say
attack.
confusion, a subtle word, as to what part of the business was important.
Filth
I expect
attack.
the focus was just sort of on profit and loss columns, and all of the
Let's
attention
rename that
was
shit to
on
Smelly Bomb.
members and members' conversations.
I think
and
Smelly
getting
Bomb
players
is
to
funnier
convert
than
to
Dirty
members
Bomb.
by
A
putting
Smelly
membership
Bomb
hooks
is
into
being
the free
dropped.
game.
Yeah,
Unfortunately,
white
that
phosphorus,
had a really
blinded
negative effect on the
individuals.
community, as you've taken what was an
Disease,
epic entirely
disease
free game and
spreading,
turned it into
disease
a sort of
control,
demo for the members game, which was never
disease
exactly.
research,
So,
accident,
unfortunately, we had a year where we did that.
scientific
One of my
disease
favorite words
research
of business in
accident,
February was ripping
scientist
that
made
part out.
mistake,
There are various
ouchie,
things we did to monetize free players, such as serving long-standing free players video advertisements.
manufactured
Something like
famine,
15 seconds
ouchie,
long,
accidental
which, while
scientist,
profitable, was simply wrong. Not in the
scientist
spirit of
made
the game.
boo-boo,
Absolutely wrong.
oops,
Mark Gerhard knew that RuneScape had been out of touch with its community most of 2008,
Oops.
and he began to
All
attempt to introduce
berries.
transparency between the business of Jagex and its player base. Jagex began
Oops,
using
razors.
social media, specifically Twitter and YouTube at this time, as a platform to communicate with their players once again because of Mark's proposed changes. On February
wrong
10th,
button
the
pressed,
Soul
and now I
Wars
have no skin
days
health.
later, on February 14th, and quite fitting for Valentine's Day,
Critical
I might add,
failure,
players
user
Level Romeo
error.
achieved 200 mil XP in agility and mining. at the
Silo
same time, being
meltdown.
the first player ever to do
Core
so
temperature
in skills.
reaching
On February
critical
16th,
level.
an update was posted on the main page
Scientist
in which Mod
ouchie.
MG would host a Q&A and answer some players'
Oops,
questions about
scientist
himself
made
as the new
boo-boo.
acting CEO, as players didn't want to repeat a
Oopsie,
It was during this
scientist
time
made
that
a
when Master P
boo-boo.
played the game at all, he answered that he currently had 90
science.
quest points and a total level of 892
Uh-oh.
on an account. In fact, much of 2009 would consist
SARS
of numerous
Bomba.
Q&As with MMG, furthering
Sundial
the
program.
back transparency and a connection
Ronald
between
Reagan
Jagex
Space
and players. On
Wars.
March 31st, most likely due to
Tungsten
the same mission
missile
of
attack.
transparency, the rant section and the compliment
The
section
pressure
of
cooker
RuneScape
contract.
forums was officially
Contractor pack of
re-added.
nails.
Speaking of forum updates,
Nail
RuneScape
machine
forums was
failure.
opened up to free players for
Uh-oh.
the first time ever.
Nails
and
went
this would
out.
become permanent. If you were a free
Oops.
player that had 12.5 mil
Here comes the
on your
nails.
account, you could now access the forums. On May 6th,
Pressurized
Wilderness
explosion
only
gas.
PvP worlds were released in RuneScape as well.
Concentrated
The original
fart
PvP
serum.
worlds would allow you to attack
Stinky.
anybody you wanted all over Gielinor. However, in these worlds, the fighting would only be restricted to the wilderness, giving players back a sense of the wilderness being dangerous, as it was up until the end of 2007. On June 9th, the rest feature was added to RuneScape alongside
Warning,
the Run
Middle
feature
East
for the next
glass
community map.
attack.
There was also musicians
Joe
taking
Biden,
place around
Democrat
the world
Hillary
who could sit
Clinton.
down and rest at that would
Uh-oh.
restore their run energy also.
We
but
didn't
much
mean to do
faster
it.
than just resting on their own.
Uh-oh,
On July
accident.
24th, RuneScape servers were released in their 4th language ever, which was Brazilian Portuguese. On August 11, 2009, Jagex had
Whoopsie
partnered up with
daisy.
Machinima from YouTube, and they held a video making competition. On the 25th of August, the competition was over, and a popular YouTuber at the time named Excel had won the competition. Excel had already been partnered with Machinima and had made hundreds of videos for them already. So, his idea for the competition was to actually make a comical video of him trying to come up with an idea for the actual competition. For winning, he received lifetime membership, as well as a paid way and stay trip to the UK to hang out at and tour Jagex Studios. He was accompanied by his good friend, another famous YouTuber named Cameron at the time, otherwise known as The Noob Show. On September 7th, a player by the name of Unknown Levs became the first level 3 account to achieve level 99 Slayer, which he was able to do through the Soul Wars minigame. 10 days later, on September 17th, Tutorial Island was once again removed and replaced by a brand new tutorial called Unstable Foundations. It was essentially a remake of the previous Learning the Ropes tutorial, only this time, it was actually voice acted by Jagex employees, being RuneScape's first piece of voice acted content. On September 23rd, living rock caverns were released in RuneScape, and a specific rock was taken out of the desert mining quarry simultaneously. The quarry had been the best XP per hour until this rock was taken out, forcing living rock caverns to become the best mining XP per hour during this year, making it quite clear that RuneScape was beginning to enter the age of social-based skilling. On October 1st, display names were released. This meant you still
I don't know,
logged into
Dominic
your
Crab.
original RuneScape
It went
username
pretty
when
long
you
last
created your
time.
account. However, your in-game name could be
It all
changed
depends.
to whatever you wanted it to be, furthering account security when it came
It really
to
all
players
depends.
being hacked. Unfortunately, though, this update caused the beginning of a RuneScape username trading black market.
I mean, we've already got 10
usernames.
days on the clock.
On November 18th, the RuneScape forum avatars and the Adventurer's Log
really
was
depends.
released on the RuneScape website that displayed your most recent achievements. You could navigate to any player's Adventurer log by searching them on the high scores or by clicking on their new forum profile avatars. On November 25th, RuneScape Classic was reopened for a short amount of time for paying members. Even though the year might have started out a little rocky in some areas, many players
Might be,
consider 2009 to be a really good, nostalgic year to have played RuneScape.
Might be even
or
more
to
on the
have started
casual
RuneScape.
side than it was last
Jagex
year.
received a number
Probably
of
won't,
awards
might
this
not
year as well.
last as
They were
long,
listed
you know.
in the Deloitte Technology Fast 50, a program that recognizes and profiles
Because
the
I'm not really doing it
fastest-growing
on the
public or
regular
private technology
channel.
companies within Central Europe. And it was because of this systematic profiling that Jagex had received the Best Company One to Watch award. They also were ranked 29th most successful game studio in the world by Develop Magazine. They were given the Best Desktop Game Project Award at the Duke's
How's
Choice
it going,
Awards,
Lucimaniac?
and also won Developer of the Year at
Yeah, it's
the
really been
Golden
that long.
Joysticks Awards.
No, the timer will be turned on during the advice show, but it'll just be separate on the other
23rd of
channel.
January in 2010,
It'll still be
huge
going on
event
on
began
there.
happening on every single RuneScape game world. Every single player in RuneScape at the same time.
I'm just not staying
was
live on
forced
that
to
channel
perform
the whole
a
time
mode
like I did
called
last
the
year.
Strange Power. When this event happened to
But
you,
everything
you
that happens
received a
there will be
message in
added
the chat
here.
box that said, "You feel a strange power unleash itself upon you." After the emote would end, players' characters would be forced to face the north towards the wilderness, and nobody could figure out why. Many players had took to the forums and began writing their theories and conspiracies. On February 1st, the trading restrictions had received an update as well. Previously, you were limited by the amount of quest points you had. That didn't go away. But
Well, when it comes down to it, if there's no sign of the, if there's no sign of it ending on the 37th day, I'll just double the price. Because that'll already be past last year, so I'll just double the price on the 37th day.
And so on. On February 22nd, Diamondheim was released into the game, and it gave players a little bit of an explanation as to what that strange power emote was all about. Originally, players thought that they were being forced to face the wilderness after the emote had ended, but it was later understood upon Diamondheim's release that this area was the true direction they'd be facing at the end of the emote. Diamondheim wasn't accessible when it was released, but it became clear to everyone that this strange event was happening, all in the name of a new skill that would soon come to RuneScape. On February 26th, Jagex announced a prize draw called the Big Ticket. If you had previously won any competition that Jagex had hosted, such as their
Think she's
last
still awake.
Cinema video competition, you could now
She's
have a
fine.
chance of winning this Big Ticket competition as well. If you won the Big Ticket, you would get to travel to Jagex again and win a lot of other prizes along with that. There were meant to be
I mean, I can
24
go
players
forever,
in this
man.
Big Ticket thing. However, the competition was later
There's no limit to how
scrapped
many
without
video
any
games I can
explanation
sit
as to
around and
why,
play.
and only 3 players ever won it. March 3rd of this year brought a number of updates. The RuneScape login screen where players would originally click here to play was done away with, and a new lobby system was put in its place. When you logged into the lobby, before you entered the game, you'd be able to join clan chats, see which of your friends were online, and you'd be able to chat
well,
with them
I mean,
there as well.
she can do
On the
whatever she
same day
wants,
of this
you know?
update, the hit point skill was renamed to Constitution. Your hit points, now known
If she wants
as
to appear,
life
she can
points,
appear.
were multiplied by 10. If you had 75 HP, you now had
Nah, she don't got it.
750 LP. Players' hit splats were also multiplied by 10 as well. If your max hit was originally 25, it would now be 250. Jagex made this change to signify that when players had originally hit zeros, they wouldn't actually be hitting zeros in the system. They'd just be hitting less than a 1, but not exactly 0, and they wanted to show that fact to everyone better. This change was not mentioned before it was released though, and major riots ensued because of Jagex being so vague before and after its release. This was seen as a massive update to the players, and a lot of them were not happy about this change. 10 days later after this, on March 13th, the first bonus XP weekend had officially launched, giving players a 2.7 times bonus when skilling on the weekends. Players were extremely apprehensive about this update at first, thinking that this would surely break any sense of achievement amongst the player base, but it actually turned out to be a massive success of an update, and bonus XP weekend still occurs on select weekends in RuneScape 3 to this day. On April 1st, Jagex released a news post along with a cartoonish-looking map that was called Wet and Wildy, and it was described in this news post that Jagex was going to open a RuneScape-themed amusement park in the future. This was obviously an April Fool's joke, but a lot of children at the time were quite upset when they found out that this was unfortunately fake, including me at the time. Jagex, a RuneScape amusement park would have been pretty freaking cool, man. On April 11th, Jars became the first player ever to achieve 2 billion XP.
I just realized that Media
overall.
Share was the
next
other
day, on April
voice.
12th, the Dungeoneering skill was released, and it was the first skill in
Media Share
RuneScape
guy's been
players
talking to us
could
for the
level
past
120.
fucking,
Because of this,
what,
Jars
hour and a half?
quit the game. On April 14, 2010, something went wrong in the dungeoneering skill, and it led to a bug that allowed players to reach absurd runecrafting XP per hour rates inside of the dungeons. This was fixed immediately, and for the first time ever, the RuneScape servers were rolled back. On May 7th, the player Skiller703 achieved level 99 dungeoneering before anybody else had. Skiller703 was ranked 1 overall at this point in time with 1.2 billion XP overall, but was later passed as many players gained dungeoneering levels over 99. On May 25th, RuneScape launched their first ever downloadable
RuneScape.
You can now play RuneScape from your desktop instead of having to.
My favorite name for RuneScape is
RuneSvape.
RuneSvape. My friend Camel used to call it RuneSvape.
Boots to skyrocket to a price of
really good name for a game, RuneSvape.
Before this, they had been worth a few hundred coins. Some players had figured out that this change
nothing cooler than
was going to
vape.
be happening before it did, though, and climbing boots were purchased in the hundreds of thousands, creating billionaires overnight after the update released. This was never fixed, barely addressed, and caused major rioting within Falador on World 66 as well. On June 15th, Jagex released Ancient Effigies into the
I think one of the
game.
funniest parts about
These
RuneScape is all the
items
rioting
gained
that the
massive
players
amounts of
do
XP.
often.
With their releases, players could no longer tell the differences between efficient skilling and the use of Ancient Effigies, and this affected skilling competitions at the time.
I have no
very
money for WoW and my
negatively.
computer is old is what I
Because of
called
this
it.
update, the assist system also had to
RuneScape.
be shut down and done away with. On August 22nd, the player Temple Marcuse
I have no money for WoW and my computer is old.
thus making him the new rank 1 overall player.
I'm gonna get some hides today, but my 2 local spots don't stock them. I think hides have fallen to the wayside, man. I think hides have lost their
first public event, however,
their market share. No one cares about hides anymore. America is all about the fucking dumbass Delph bar now.
The fuck is that?
Fucking elf bars. It's all fucking elf
Oh,
this
right.
and elf that.
I have one of those in the mail, a spearmint.
It's
so I can see
bullshit,
how
man. The
bad it
fucking
is.
the hide energized were way fucking cool.
Jagex would hold in the UK, and it's still to this day an event that is very looked forward to by many. On October 18th, loads
I'm
of
too
new game
minty
sounds
for
were
all
being
that
put into
shit.
the game for both players' reactions and monsters' reactions.
Elf bars
Instead
are
of a
okay,
small
man, but the
grunt
hide
that
energized
usually
was
do when you
like,
were injured,
you know,
the
top
player
notch.
actually screamed now. October ended this month with Jagex, once again for the second year in a row, receiving the title of Best Developer at the Golden Joysticks Awards.
Nothing has
29th.
come close to
On November
touching
24th, 2010, the way
Esco
RuneScape
bars
players
so
logged into
far.
the game
An
was
energy-flavored
changed
elf
to
bar.
account security.
Like Red
Previously,
Bull?
you had to log in
Because I had an
with
elf
Gmail,
bar that was supposed to be
but
monster
players
flavored, and I
registered
really
past
didn't like it.
2010, they would now be given
And
the
I don't think they
option
have
to
a,
log in with an email
I
address
don't think I have a Red Bull
instead.
flavor here.
On December 21st,
To be
after
fair,
3
every
long
vape company
years,
has a Red
Jagex
Bull
released
flavor,
a
and they're
poll on the
mostly
front
pretty
page of their
good.
website titled
They're few and far between in
It was a
Canada, at
poll that
least.
allowed players to vote on whether or not they
They're,
wanted the wilderness to be brought back and the trading and staking limits to be removed.
The only one
There
I
was
found
no
is the
vote
one for the
option on this
those
poll,
little
however,
disposable
the votes were not
pod
verified,
clicky
meaning that
things.
People quickly began spamming the vote counter over and over. Due to this first poorly executed poll, Jagex released the
Well, if
same
they have
poll
an
once
energy
again
drink
3 days
flavor,
later on
it's
the
safe to say it's
24th,
good. They
with
all
proper
use the
vote
same
spammer
shit.
precautions
I don't like the
in place,
monster
and
ones.
this time
They
the poll
they have the
was
energy
Well,
ones,
yeah,
but
sure.
they're like it's monster
Jagex
or some
stated
shit.
that
And
the
I
poll
don't know.
prior to this
fucked
one
up.
did not have
Tastes
an option
weird.
before because if players didn't want the wilderness and free trade to return, all they had to do was simply not vote. It was also during this month, in December, that Andrew Gower had been put under a lot of stress since he had first created RuneScape back in 2001. Things were changing, and he was unhappy with these changes, and more so, having to be responsible for them. He would later say in RuneScape's 15th year anniversary documentary the following: "I suddenly realized whilst I wasn't in charge, all of a sudden, what I had to say didn't matter so much. People would be doing things not the way I wanted them to do them. That was the whole point, of course. I didn't want to be responsible. I just
Cool,
wanted to be
Jenna.
able to
Pod
advise and help
system,
and nurture the
right.
game I had made without having to be so responsible. But as soon as that responsibility was taken away, I realized, oh dear. You can't have it both ways. Without the responsibility, you can't have the authority. You can't have one without the other. And by trying to make myself less stressed and reduce the responsibility, I had also reduced the authority. And I made a mistake, quite frankly. It eventually reached the point where I wasn't
no
doing
Chinese
anything for
chemicals.
Jagex anymore, and there was no sort of date when I left either. It was just something that sort of faded away. Andrew had finally sold his stakes in Jagex and left the board of directors at the end of 2010. Mod Mark in later years would state that he never got the chance to hug him and just say thanks for everything. January opened up this year with Jagex celebrating RuneScape's 10-year anniversary. Because of this, the company actually gave out $10,000 to one lucky player every single month of the year because of this anniversary. On January 10th, RuneScape received the next boss, being the first monster ever in RuneScape with a combat level of 1000. On January 14th, the voting for the Wilderness and Free Trade to Return poll was closed, and 3 days later on January 17th, Jagex had confirmed in a news post that they would both definitely be brought back. The poll ended with almost 1.2 million players voting yes, making up 91% of the poll compared to the other players that voted no for the change. On February 1st, 2011, the Wilderness and Free Trade had officially been re-implemented into the game and Bounty Hunter Worlds were removed. Unfortunately, many players had left because of the Wilderness and the Free Trade update at the beginning of 2008. Here's what RuneScape looked like in 2008. Here's what RuneScape looked like in 2011. I myself attempted to return to the game in 2011 after I had quit in 2009, but when I came back, even though the Wilderness and the Free Trading was back, everything else still seemed, now more than ever, unrecognizable. I myself wouldn't return to RuneScape again until 2014 after hearing about the release of Old School RuneScape 1 year after it had already been out. This case of mine, unfortunately for Jagex at the time, would be the cases of many throughout these years. Even though they brought the Wilderness and Free Trading back in 2011, RuneScape as a whole since 2008 had changed drastically. On April 12th this year, Clan Chat was renamed to Friends Chat, and a more proper version of Clan Chat was put into the game for actual clans. On April 21st, Jagex won the Queen's Award for Enterprise within the Innovation category. On May 3rd, the Capes of Distinction were released. The player Castle Wars would be the first player ever to obtain a completionist cape just 20 minutes after the update had released. Castle Wars had helped Jagex with the requirement suggestions for this update, and because of this, he and he alone would be the only one with the completionist cape for about 3 months after they were brought into the game. On the 28th of June, the Loyalty program released. This was a shop that was introduced into the game world that you could visit and purchase items and auras for your player, based off of how long you had recurring membership status. Some of these auras did things like making your player deliver the last killing blow to a monster 100% of the time. Though a very small thing, it did mark the beginning for a little glimpse into the future of RuneScape, as the game would soon start leaning towards a pay-to-win style. On July 26th, Clan Citadels were released. On August 6th, some bug abusers had actually obtained the Rotten Potato by pickpocketing Mod Chriso within the Stealing Creations minigame. This marks the first time ever that a non-JMod player had a JMod item in their inventory. On August 18th, the Refer a Friend system was introduced by Jagex. If you referred a friend, and your friend achieved a certain level status within the game after playing for a bit, you, as the referrer, would receive a 10% XP boost for 1 week. Players were limited to 5 refers per year. September marked the month where the Suwami era would begin in RuneScape, as he would climb to rank 1 overall and hold it for quite some time. Suwami's actually a good friend of mine, and on a personal side note here, I do miss him, as he hasn't played the game in a very long time. On October 4th, RuneScape received a small, yet sort of big update. The camera controls were no longer limited by your arrow keys as they had been ever since RuneScape's creation. You can now use your middle mouse wheel when controlling the camera instead. October 25th, 2011.
Yeah, Trailer Park Boys was better before Netflix bought it. But then again, Trailer Park Boys didn't exist before Netflix bought it.
This banned
after season
7
7
million of illegitimate accounts in one night. Unfortunately,
so it was either like nothing or the Netflix shit,
a third of
and I think I'm happier with the Netflix shit than I am with nothing.
About 35% of RuneScape's player base.
Because I did enjoy watching those first few seasons.
Players couldn't understand this.
You ever been on SwearNet?
Yeah, I watched their SwearNet Trailer Park Boys season that they put out 2 or 3 years ago. It was okay.
For me, it's the Mailbag Show, and Andy getting fucked up at the golf course and getting kicked out.
November 22nd,
I think there might be a new season coming out on SwearNet.
RuneScape Revolution. Within this update, RuneScape received another game frame change, more particle and graphics reworks, and to top it all off, the high scores was permanently removed for free players. This meant that free-to-play competitive skilling would become a thing of the past. On December 6th, the Tool Belt and Muddy Pouch was released in RuneScape as well. You no longer had to have...
You like Corner Gas? I've never really seen Corner Gas. Nathan, for you, I've only seen a few. I didn't see that. We didn't watch the new show. We were waiting until it finished, and then we forgot about it.
Any of these tools when training the skills that they were associated with, if you had placed them in your Tool Belt menu. During this year, Jagex had reached over 500 employees at their company. It was also during this year that Inside Venture Partners had increased their stake in Jagex. They increased it from 35% to 55%, giving it a controlling factor in the company's decisions from here on out. On January 4th of this year, all Barrow's armor had received a graphical upgrade. On January 10th, RuneScape received the Best Browser Game Award and the Game of the Year Award on Massively.com.
Looks like there's probably no plans for them making a new live-action Trailer Park Boys anytime soon.
Received a major graphical upgrade, which at the time I thought looked awesome.
No, it looks like there's nothing really for Trailer Park Boys. Other than their like swearing at videos and shit, but you know, sorry fellas, who gives a shit, man.
Marking the beginning of microtransactions being put into RuneScape. On March 6th,
it's probably because Netflix doesn't want to pay them to make another show. They don't want to produce it themselves or fund it. It's probably too expensive.
On March 13th, lodestones were put into place.
Really good stuff, Pepper Wuss.
Players could
I'll be here tomorrow.
To any city they wanted at any time. 2012's April Fool event was a really fun one. Jagex had posted that they were giving out green pea hats in Lumbridge. If you went to Lumbridge,
totems aren't back. I just gave
party
up.
Hat you received, like most people were hoping for, however, instead it was literally just an actual pea that you could put on your head. In the same April Fool's update, Jagex also released a very hilarious video where they showed off what they called at the time Jag Motion, an exciting new way to play RuneScape in virtual reality. April 2nd was the day that microtransactions officially made their way into RuneScape. The Squill of Fortune had already been out since February, but you couldn't buy spins up until now. Up until now, it seemed like an innocent update. You could now buy these spins with real-world money, or you could get them from a ticket from Monster Drops. Essentially, children began gambling on this game. This caused major riots, like RuneScape had never seen before. The wilderness and free trade had just been brought back, and the whole removal of it in the first place in 2008 was because of real-world trading. So Jagex seemed extremely hypocritical amongst players for releasing this update. In fact, even some Jagex moderators were not happy about this update. To many, with the introductions of microtransactions, RuneScape became just like every other game out there, and was considered no longer special. Shortly after this update, Paul Gower resigned, as he had promised that RuneScape would never receive microtransactions as far back as 2003. 22 days later, on April 24th, free players and members could receive even more spins on the Squill of Fortune by completing quests. On April 30th, 2012, the RuneSpan was released, a whole new plane of existence in which players could train runecrafting. This update skyrocketed runecrafting's XP per hour rates, and because of it, having 99 runecrafting at this time became one of the least popular achievements.
Letterkenny was good also. I was supposed to see them, but then Ontario had that emergency lockdown the weekend of the show. They canceled. Yeah, Letterkenny, I don't know. I liked them better when it was just the fucking web episodes.
Yeah. Should have stayed at YouTube.
Yeah, I didn't like their TV show was like really disappointing compared to the YouTube shit.
Yeah, it was probably a success because children became addicted to gambling their real-world money away. On May 10th, firemaking was completely changed. Instead of lighting logs in a straight line like everyone had before, players would now create bonfires in which other players could throw logs on other players' fires, receiving firemaking XP. When you used another player's bonfire, you were also given a slight bonus and boost in your XP rate for the skill as well. The game was completely changing, and RuneScape's biggest update ever began development. On May 18th, 2012, the Evolution of Combat beta sign-up period was released for paying members of the game to apply for. On May 22nd, the Queen Black Dragon boss released with a combat level of 900. On May 28th, a single update was released titled Squill of Fortune, Win More, Win Big. Jagex had announced that it was now even more possible for players to win bigger prizes when spinning the wheel. For example, the 200 mil cash stack on the wheel had been changed to 500 mil, and you had a 10 times better chance of winning it. On June 4th, the Squill of Fortune was changed to the Squill of Neptune, featuring more aquatic items. You can now obtain a rare category item called a fish mask that blew bubbles on the wheel, and it was also tradable, yet somehow today isn't really rare at all, even though it's a discontinued item. I guess it just goes to show that if the player base doesn't like something strong enough, even intended rares simply just won't become rare with time. This fish mask was the first rare item that had been introduced to the game ever since Santa Hats released in December of 2002. 10 days later, on June 14th, Jagex announced that the Squill of Fortune spins were on sale for 50% off, and if you bought them, you'd also receive 50% more bonus spins when spinning the wheel because of it. On June 26th, the Evolution of Combat beta had officially launched for the applicants that had signed up to try it. 50,000 players were accepted for this. On July 1st, 2012, the Squill of Fortune's wheel was replaced with nothing but XP lamps for
Only show I know that
During
didn't
this
get
week,
banned for going to
XP
Cable's High
rates of
Maintenance.
players
Great
skyrocketed
show.
based off of how wealthy they were in the real
Love
world,
High Maintenance.
furthering the pay-to-win concept.
Wish they didn't get canceled.
On July 17th, the Solomon's General
I mean, this deserved more than 4
along
seasons.
with rune coins. You could buy rune coins off of the RuneScape website with real-world money and use those rune coins to purchase cosmetic items from the newly released Solomon's General store, furthering the company's decisions with microtransactions. On July 19th, Jagex had announced that RuneScape had received over 200 million accounts registered on their game. On August 10th, even more skins were added to the Solomon's General store.
The creators got
players'
divorced?
shields and
Oh,
weapons.
for real?
4 days later, on August 14th, it was announced that Jagex had once again doubled the amount of cash on the Squill of Fortune.
Bad
On August
excuse.
29th, another news update was posted where
Yeah,
Mod
kinda
MG once
true.
again called the Squill of Fortune, as well as this time the Solomon's General store, massive successes despite even more hate. On September 9th of this year, Gielinor was being changed heavily in preparation for the release of the Evolution of Combat. A lot of landscapes at this time were having their graphical appearances upgraded. On September 26th, Botany Bay was released. This put an area in the game where all botters would go if they were caught cheating in-game. Players could visit Botany Bay and make fun of them when they had been captured. It was a funny little update, and the technology and programming behind this new botting detection software was actually developed by former botting website owner Jack Mob, who was later given a job at Jagex by Mark Gerhard because of his programming skills. On the 9th of October, the King Black Dragon, RuneScape's first ever boss monster, finally received its own graphical upgrade. The rest of October's updates this year were all about the Squill of Fortune and the Solomon's General store. On November 9th, Jagex released a poll in which players gave their feedback about the Evolution of Combat coming to RuneScape. Here were the results. 11 days later, on November 20th, the biggest, most controversial, community-splitting update in RuneScape's evolutionary history, the Evolution of Combat, was released across all RuneScape servers. During this year, Jagex's turnover as a business rose almost 50 million pounds, most likely due to the Squill of Fortune and the Solomon's General store. On January 23rd of this year, an update was posted on the main news feed in which Mod MMG finally agreed with the community about the Squill of Fortune and the Solomon's General store, admitting that most of 2012's update feed was dominated by the two microtransaction shops. The next day, on January 24th, RuneScape player So Wrecked made a video on YouTube challenging
Boringest
Jagex to
video?
release an
Yeah,
older
that's
version
pretty
of
true.
RuneScape. He created a petition for this change on change.org, and 44,700 previously,
That's pretty
in
true.
2012, a private server was created called 2006scape, but it was shut down by Jagex on January 2nd of this year after having 500,000 players registered on it. The community's passion for the older game version became very clear to Jagex. On February 1st, Mod Mark released a forum thread talking about the passion for the developers and the players alike that all took part in 2006scape. He even asked Andrew Gower at this time what he thought about bringing an older version of the game back, and Andrew immediately agreed that this would be a good move for Jagex. However, most J-mods estimated that old school RuneScape's lifespan would only be about 6 months before it would have to be shut down. Wrong. So, 12 days later, a huge advertisement for a poll was displayed on the main website that read, Old School RuneScape, you vote. Within this poll, there were a number of milestones that could be met in correspondence with the vote count. The voting ended with a total number of 449,351 votes. Due to players' votes almost reaching a specific milestone, Old School RuneScape received a proper development team that would update the game consistently, and the first 6 months of Old School RuneScape membership would be absolutely free for everyone. It was Mod Philip who found an old hard drive that contained the August 10th, 2007 revision of RuneScape in the back of a safe at Jagex headquarters. On February 22nd, 2013, Old School RuneScape was officially released to the public. Just 5 days later, OSRS player Adtrait was the first player ever to achieve a level 99 in OSRS, being the thieving skill. On March 1st, the player Vongola achieved level 99 cooking first as well. Over in the other version of RuneScape, a new era began in the game as the quest The World Wakes was released, marking the beginning of the 6th age within the game version's lore, meaning that all other quests prior to this one had taken place in the past within the 5th age. That's actually really interesting and cool to me. On March 18th, Suwami would become the first player ever to reach 5 billion total XP overall, making him also the first player to have ever gained 200 million XP in every single stat. On March 29th, the HTML5 beta of RuneScape was announced. This HTML5 client was, at one point in time, thought to be by Jagex the future of browser gaming. With this massive client change soon to be happening to RuneScape 2, Jagex decided to begin officially calling this game version RuneScape 3. On April 17th, the RuneScape 3 beta program was released for players to sign up and try out the new graphics associated with the HTML5 client. On April 24th, RuneScape 3 received an update in which the game frame could be edited around your game screen, much like customizable HUDs on other video games. Along with this update, a massive overhaul and rework of RuneScape 3's songs were done by an actual orchestra. They had previously been done by a synthesizer. As an example of this, here's what the song Harmony now sounded like compared to its older version.
Alright, I'm going to be going to bed in a minute here.
From April to July within RuneScape 3, most of their updates were about the HTML5 beta program.
Won't be sleeping on camera until I get some shit from Amazon.
Along with a brand new
there's 10 days on the clock anyways.
It was also during these months that otherwise moderators were reinstated
an IP
on the
camera
forums as community managers for the other non-English RuneScape 3 servers. On August 16th, 2013,
command strips I can glue it to the wall.
that originally created the petition for old school RuneScape was hired at Jagex. 2 days later, though, on August 18th, he would be fired before he could even start the job, due to a video leaking of him saying that he, as a Jagex moderator, would have definitely abused his powers. He also said some pretty racist stuff. On August 20th, within RuneScape 3, the Divination skill released. 9 days later, on August 29th, the player I'm Choices achieved level 99 Divination first, before anybody. On the 5th of September,
and I don't trust you people
Old School RuneScape received its very first
to leave the media share open, so I flooded it with dancing fruit.
2007 game version being the Nightmare Zone.
Until tomorrow.
Jagex had been doing research on gold farming again, and they had found that over 50% of the RuneScape community at
especially on the account that's not
RuneScape
partnered
careers had purchased gold, and that they
too easy
wanted
to get
to
randomly
do something
banned.
about it. On September 25th, Jagex made a decision that they did not take lightly with old school RuneScape. They had released membership bonds within the game. It was essentially an item in-game that you could redeem for membership after you had bought it off of the old school RuneScape website. The idea for this update happened when someone had come to ModMark and mentioned a video game that they were playing, in which actual membership for whatever game that was an in-game item that could be purchased. ModMark thought seriously about this, as well as Jagex as a whole, wondering if they could do the same with the OSRS membership. The company had remembered 2012 and how horribly it went with the introductions of microtransactions like this, and everyone was extremely worried and apprehensive, but the old school RuneScape membership bonds turned out to be a massive success, and still are to this day the only form of microtransactions that exist within old school RuneScape. Following this update, real-world trading had dropped by 61%. On October 27, 2013, old school RuneScape player Jebrim became the first player ever within the game version to achieve all level 99 stats. On the 12th of December this year, Jagex CEO Mark Gerhard was forced to resign from Jagex. He was forced because he had disagreed with microtransactions becoming more and more prevalent within RuneScape 3. The board of directors at Jagex wanted to keep adding them, and he didn't want any part of it and tried to fight it, so they voted him out. He would remain CEO another year before leaving, however, due to legal contracts. On the next day, on December 13th, RuneScape 3 player Drumgun was the first to achieve 200 mil XP in the Divination skill. Old school RuneScape ended this year with the player Vestfold achieving rank 1 overall on December 28th, overtaking the rank from the player User, who had previously been rank 1 overall for the past month. On January 16th of this year, OSRS received an update that placed a hit points orb and prayer orb next to the minimap. 1 week later, on January 23rd, the Stronghold Slayer Cave was released at the Gnome Stronghold as well, giving a little more variety when it came to training the Slayer skill. Over in RuneScape 3, on February 4th, the School of Fortune was reworked and renamed to Treasure Hunter. Instead of buying spins, you can now buy keys to open chests.
Okay, bye!
On February 6th, OSRS received a mechanic called Quick Prayers, in which you could click your prayer orb, and it would bring up multiple specific prayers for you that you had chosen to be your quick prayers. Along with this update, the HP orb received the heal option when you were poisoned as well, and the run energy orb that was displayed on the minimap could now be clicked whenever you wanted to run somewhere, instead of having to navigate to the wrench at the bottom of the game frame. Also in the same update, boss monsters' loot that they dropped would now be broadcasted within the game's chat. On March 13th, the wilderness within OSRS received a massive rejuvenation, and many boss monsters and other high-level monsters were put in place around the entire wilderness, making it much more dangerous to venture into. On April 1st, a long-anticipated skill called Sailing was released in Old School RuneScape as an April Fool's joke, and a nod back to the past anticipation players once had when they believed that this skill might have been coming to the game. On April 10th, the Smoke Devil and the Kraken boss was released. On April 24th, the Motherlode Mine was released into OSRS as well, making training mining a bit more interesting than it, already was. On April 28th, RuneScape 3 had received Master Skill Capes. Players who had achieved a virtual level of 120 in skills now had new skill capes to show for it. On May 1st, RuneScape 3 also received portable skilling stations. These stations were very close to the banks that furthered the aspect of social skilling within that game version. On the 8th of May, something that never existed in the original 2007 version of RuneScape was released into OSRS, being bank tabs, which many players found to be extremely useful. Especially if you're like me, I am so OCD about that. On May 14th, Drumgun had officially passed Suwami in RuneScape 3, becoming the new Rank 1 overall. On May 27th, Old School RuneScape was opened up to free players for the first time for a short period of time. Originally, you needed membership to be able to play OSRS, but during this time, anybody could now try it out. On June 19th, within the game version, Clan Wars was released in the desert. On July 2nd, Drumgun received 200 million XP in the farming skill, capping his account at 5.2 billion XP overall. Because of this, Drumgun would be rank 1 overall in RuneScape 3 permanently until a new skill was released. On July 14th, Legacy Mode was added to RuneScape 3. Within Legacy Mode worlds, you can now play RuneScape 3 without the evolution of combat. The combat instead would be much like the older version of the game. On July 17th in OSRS, Jagex noticed that the monster spawn timers were sort of outdated, and they reworked them to match up to the current player base numbers. Along with this update, loads of boss monster pets were added into the game. On July 24th, the OSRS free-to-play trial period was extended due to the massive success that it was. In the same update, the boss monster kill count numbers were added to the game's chat. On the 7th of August, Jagex had released Old School RuneScape's first ever downloadable client. Prior to this, everyone used a third-party client or their internet browsers. On August 8th, within a period of 2 12-hour-long streams, OSRS player and massively popular YouTuber and streamer Bodhi had raised £50,000 for Macmillan cancer support by live streaming Old School RuneScape. On August 21st, in-game poll booths were released in OSRS. Poll booths were added at every single bank in OSRS, and it made getting votes and feedback from players for Jagex much easier. So far, Jagex had released only poll past updates, in which results of the votes exceeded 75% positive. On the 9th of September, random events were made optional. And the same day, a news post was posted on RuneScape 3's website and Old School RuneScape's website. It was an official letter from Mark Gerhard officially resigning from Jagex and saying goodbye. On September 18th, Jagex released Bounty Hunter within Old School. On September 22nd, Prifddinas was finally released in RuneScape 3. This city had existed on the RuneScape map for 10 years before this, but was never officially implemented until now. On October 11th at RuneFest 2014, Jagex had announced that the original plans for the HTML5 RS3 client had been scrapped. On October 13th, heavily inspired by Faux Freedom and Bodhi's gameplay during this year within Old School, Iron Man and Ultimate Iron Man modes were released within RuneScape 3 and Old School RuneScape. It was also the same day that longtime popular RuneScape YouTuber Chris Archie had officially joined Jagex and would now be known as Mod Archie, hosting many of the company's live streams and videos on their YouTube channels from here on out. On October 16th, the Corporal Beast was released in Old School, along with the boss's Spirit Shields and Sigils. On the 12th of December, the Trading Post was released in every bank within OSRS. The Grand Exchange had not existed yet in Old School RuneScape during this time. The Trading Post was implemented because prior to it, players had been trading with other players through a website called Zybez. They would put their items up for sale and be PM'd by another player in-game. They would meet and make trades. The trading post would put an end to this, being virtually similar to the previous website itself, but it was in-game instead. December ended 2014 with old school RuneScape player Sick Nerd achieving rank 1 overall on the high scores. On January 8th, Old School RuneScape received a new boss monster, being Zulrah, the Snake. Next month on February 5th, the Dragon Defender was released as well. With the massive success Old School RuneScape's extended free-to-play trial accumulated, it was decided on February 19th that Old School RuneScape would receive permanent free-to-play servers. This brought so many players to Old School because of this decision from Jagex. On February 26, 2015, the Grand Exchange was released in Old School RuneScape and the trading post had been removed from the game. This update was highly controversial and the Old School community was essentially half and half when it came to this decision. After its release, players no longer had to stand
This
in the Rock
Dyson
West
Street
Bank
program
spamming
game
that
is
they were
fucking
selling something.
crazy.
On March 5th, loads of more achievement diaries were put in place in Old School RuneScape. Along with this update, an achievement diary skill cape was also released that players could obtain if they completed them all. On March 13th, RuneScape 3 Ironman player Dreyri became the first RS3 Ironman to achieve level 99 in all skills. On March 19th, Old School received an update to the chat dialogues. You can now press numbers when choosing
40
dialogue
hours.
option, and you can press the spacebar
Sorry,
as well
80
to
hours
continue to
played
the
in
next
2
dialogues
weeks.
in the chat. On March 23rd, RuneScape 3 saw the release of its 200th quest, being the Dimensions of Disaster. On April Fool's Day this year, Jagex posted a news update on the OSRS page in which they described how they had recently implemented the quest While Gothic Sleeps into the game, as well as Dragon Claws. Dragon Claws weren't out yet in Old School RuneScape. The quest wasn't actually in the game, but a pair of fake Dragon Claws actually were. You could click a wield option on them, and your player would perform the Dragon Claw special attack emote. After the event was over, they were renamed to Diango's Claws. On the 21st of April this year, a Jagex moderator by the name of Mod Reach was fired for reasons that are still unknown to this day, though it was widely rumored that he was planning to implement a major bug into the game that would have damaged Old School's economy immensely. On April 24th, Jagex proposed a new Old School RuneScape website design to players. Here's what it looked like. This wasn't old school at all to many, and players quickly shut this poll down with no votes immediately. Jagex still to this day has never proposed a new OSRS website design again. On May 7th, Partnered Slayer was released in Old School, which made training Slayer a little more fun now that you could do it with a friend. On the 21st of May, the World Switcher was released on the logout screen within the game. On June 4th, Old School RuneScape finally received a resizable game screen option, in which players could now play Old School RuneScape in a full screen mode, instead of within a tiny resolution if you were playing on the original fixed mode. On the 25th of June, Platinum tokens were released into the game, and each one of these tokens served as a substitute for 1,000 gold coins each. So, if you hit max cash in RuneScape, you could transfer some of that wealth into Platinum tokens and still be able to hold more gold coins after doing so. As you can imagine, these became extremely popular amongst stakers at the Duel Arena. On this same day, all boss monster rooms and dungeons within the game received a peek option, letting you know if another player was inside killing the boss monsters that you wanted to kill already. On July 13th, RuneScape 3 had received a high-level group combat activity known as Raids, and along with them came 2 new boss monsters, being Beastmaster Durzag and Yakamaru. On July 30th of this year, OSRS received the ability to customize your F keys, and alongside this update, a music skill cape had also been added for any players that had unlocked every single song within the game. On August 8th, the Jad Pet was released, an XP number drop counter was released, and a page on the OSRS website in which Grand Exchange item stock changes could now be viewed and tracked by merchanters. On August 14th, OSRS player Link's Titan achieved level 99 range, making him rank 1 overall within the game. Link's Titan still to this day is rank 1 overall currently within Old School RuneScape. On August 27th, OSRS received a new boss as well, being the Hellhound Slayer boss, Cerberus. Jagex had released some great updates to Old School RuneScape this year, but every now and again, they would propose something that players would quickly vote no on. Another example of this would be that during this month, the sailing skill was actually proposed to the players via poll, but it was, in my opinion unfortunately, voted no against by the majority of players. I only wanted it because I, along with many, had anticipated this becoming an official skill ever since 2006. Over in RuneScape 3, on September 14th, the player Llama Orb became the first Iron Man account to have obtained a trimmed completionist cape. On September 16th, RuneScape 3 received a new game mode called Darkscape, a mode in which PvP was enabled all throughout the specific game world. On the same day, for an undisclosed reason, localized moderators were once again removed from the forums, this time permanently. It was also during September of 2015 that Old School RuneScape's player base had officially passed RuneScape 3's player base, making OSRS the more popular version of both games. On October 1st, another Slayer boss was released to Old School, being the Abyssal Sire. Along with its release, more Abyssal weapons were added to the game as well. On October 5th, RuneScape 3's stat menu was updated to where players could see their virtual levels past 99, even though most skills during this time were still capped at 99 and not actually 120 like Dungeoneering was. On October 13th, the very first OSRS Iron Man player, being Leslie, had achieved level 99 in all skills. On October 15th, the Max Cape was put into OSRS for all players that had achieved level 99s in all skills as well. At the end of October on the 29th, a game mode similar to RuneScape 3's Darkscape mode was released in Old School, and it was called Deadman Mode. The same rules applied to this mode as RS3, and PvP and Deadman Mode worlds were allowed anywhere. On November 5th, skilling pets were released in OSRS as well, making skilling after level 99 seem more worth doing, as there was still an achievement you could obtain. On the 19th of November, the Max Cape was updated to be able to be combined with the Fire Cape, Ava's Accumulator, and the Zamorak, Saradomin, and Guthix Magic Capes. 2015 ended this year with an update to OSRS December 3rd, in which skill capes now had perks when they were worn. For example, the Magic skill cape would now allow players to swap between spellbooks 5 times per day. On the 7th of January, Old School RuneScape had received its biggest update yet. It received a brand new continent in the northwestern corner of the map called Zaya. Over the course of mid-2015, development blogs had been talking about this continent's release, and loads of concept was put out depicting what Zaya would look like when it did release. However, the continent didn't even really seem like much of a continent when it did release. It was interesting to explore, but honestly, the whole thing was sort of a big flop when it first came out. The continent was very squarish, and the surrounding areas didn't seem very natural looking as they could have been. Jagex worked hard on this continent, and Zaya looks great today, but when it first released, it seemed very unfinished, and not much content could be found on the continent itself. On January 21st, Jagex added an addition to Zaya, being some boss monsters known as the Lizardmen Shamans. The Shamans would drop a new dragon weapon, being the Dragon Warhammer, a very useful weapon for bossing that is still very much used in OSRS today. Over in RuneScape 3, on the 25th of January, the game's 27th skill was released, being the Invention skill. On January 26th, the very next day, and also under 24 hours, the player Scuzzy had achieved level 99 Invention first, followed by achieving level 120 Invention first, the very next day on the 27th as well. On January 31st, the player Lei Mi became the new rank 1 overall player in RuneScape 3. Lei Mi is still rank 1 overall in RS3 even today. On March 9th of this year, Jagex had released seasonal Deadman Mode worlds. Players would be able to play Deadman Mode on these worlds for 3 months, only until their accounts were reset. After they'd been reset, the top 2,000 players that had progressed their accounts the most during the season would then qualify to participate in the Deadman Mode Seasonal Invitational Tournament hosted by Jagex later on. The prize for winning these tournaments would be $10,000. On March 21st, the first OSRS player to place first in a Deadman Mode Invitational was the player You Never Learn. On March 28th, unfortunately, Darkscape in RuneScape 3 was officially removed and done away with due to players not really being interested in participating in that game mode. On April 14th next month, Old School RuneScape's banks were once again updated with item placeholders. If you had the placeholders option toggled in your bank, your items would stay in the bank at a number of 0 after you withdrew them instead of just disappearing. On May 6th, the Monkey Madness 2 quest was released in OSRS. On June 6, 2016, RuneScape 3 and Old School RuneScape somewhat celebrated the Falador Massacre by each game version putting on their own events to commemorate the day the original massacre took place. In Old School RuneScape, you could find Duriel321 killing players in Falador, and in RuneScape 3, other players became Duriel and attacked other players around them. Jagex also recreated Cursed U's house as it was in 2006 for players to visit. Furthering Zaya's development in the year, on June 9th, OSRS received a new Slayer dungeon on Zaya, being the Catacombs of Korend. 7 days later, a new boss monster was also put in the Catacombs, being the demon Skatizo. On July 6th, master-level clue scrolls were introduced into Old School, and along with them, loads of new rewards. Master Clues is still popular to this day as content for streamers on Twitch. On the 5th of July this year, RuneScape had received a massive expansion to their worlds, being the Eastern Lands, a continent that was rumored to release for a long time as far back as the year 2005. On August 4th, the Last Man Standing minigame was released in Old School RuneScape, and the game was similar to a Battle Royale. On August 5th, the JMods of OSRS released a news post discussing third-party clients. Third-party clients are clients that you can play Old School RuneScape on, such as RuneLight, which offers an immense amount of tools useful for skilling that the original official OSRS client didn't have. While RuneLite had been confirmed to be perfectly fine to use from Jagex, other third-party clients that the players began using were beginning to get them in trouble. One such client that Jagex mentioned within the news post was a client called RuneScape HD. This client completely transformed the game into an HD version of old-school RuneScape. Jagex stated that this client was indistinguishable from botting clients within their botting software detection systems, and that using it would most likely result in players' accounts being banned. Because of this, Jagex began becoming more transparent about which third-party clients were okay to use, and which ones, sometimes even unfortunately, were not, even if they weren't cheating-related clients. On August 22nd, RuneScape 3 had released their own set of skilling pets. On August 25th, the construction skill in OSRS received a massive expansion upgrade. Prior to this update, there weren't very many tools within players' houses that could help them when they were skilling in the game. That all changed after this update brought loads of useful tools to players' houses, and players had more of an incentive to train construction after a certain point that was previously seemingly pointless. On September 8th, training firemaking in old-school RuneScape became more fun and less pointless when Jagex added a boss for the skill called the Winter Toad, in which players would work together to defeat making firemaking, now a social skill, and actually a pretty good money-making method. Before this, when you trained firemaking, it seemed like you were just burning your money away for no reason with the logs you had bought. 4 days later, on September 12th, Jagex had announced that RuneScape had achieved a milestone of 250 million accounts registered. On October 6th, free players within old-school RuneScape had received their very first boss monster, being a level 106 hill giant called Obor. Prior to this, the only monster that would have been considered a boss in free-to-play was Elvarg, the dragon that the players would defeat during the Dragon Slayer quest. On October 25th, Ian Gower, the last founder of RuneScape still working at Jagex, decided to leave the company to pursue other projects. On the 10th of November, Old School RuneScape received a new Iron Man mode, being Hardcore Iron Man mode. Players who didn't die at the Corporal Beast cave by accidentally misclicking on their way to the bathroom would keep this red status symbol next to their name, so long as they never died. Sorry, buddy. If they did die, they would be downgraded to a normal Iron Man account. On November 11th, Hardcore Iron Man mode player Iron Seto achieved the title of Final Boss in RuneScape 3. This title required the player to have killed all boss monsters in the game 100 times without dying. On November 17th, the continent of Zaya and OSRS received a massive graphical overhaul, making it much more natural looking, as it had originally been planned to be. On March 30th, 2017, Club Penguin was officially shut down. Just kidding, just making sure you're paying attention. I'm actually not kidding, Club Penguin was shut down. Anyway, on January 5th of 2017, Old School RuneScape received the Chambers of Zarek, commonly known as raids within the Kebos Lowlands on the southwestern region of the continent of Zaya. During raids, players would work together to get through rooms filled with puzzles and tasks before coming to the end where the final boss, the Great Olm, would reside. Olm had a combat level of 1043, being Old School's first boss monster that was level 1000. This activity would also bring on loads of new rewards for players to try to get for completing the raids. The most popular being the Twisted Bow, which today is worth 1.1 billion coins within Old School RuneScape, making it the 5th most expensive item in the game as of September 17th, 2020. On February 2nd, OSRS also received an update that put silver jewelry in the game for the first time. These silver jewelry items would also come with teleports and many helpful attributes when it came to skilling. On February 23rd, the shift-click dropping system was added to Old School, and construction became a lot easier with keyboard shortcuts being added to the building menus as well. On April 5th, Jagex had changed their logo for the first time ever since 2008. Throughout Jagex's lifespan as a company, including this new logo, there has only ever been 3 Jagex logos altogether. On May 25th, a world map orb was put into Old School RuneScape's game frame near the minimap. It allowed players to view the world map in-game and see where their players were walking at on the map in real time. Prior to this update, you had to look up the map online or view it on the OSRS website. On June 1st, Old School RuneScape received a new best-in-slot cape over the Fire Cape. Similar to the Czar Fight Caves where players would have to survive 63 waves of monsters, Jagex had released another minigame called the Inferno. Within this minigame, players had to survive 68 waves of monsters before reaching the final boss on wave 69, being a level 1400 monster called Zuck. At one point during this minigame, you are literally attacked by 4 different Jads all at once. If players manage to defeat Zuck, they will receive an Infernal Cape as a reward, the best cape within the game still to this day. Widely considered by the community to be RuneScape's greatest PvMer, the player Wooks would come to be the first OSRS player to complete the Inferno just 2 days after it was released on June 3rd, granting him a reward of a real-life version of the Inferno cape sent from Jagex. On June 5th of this year, RuneScape 3 received an update that had been anticipated ever since 2005, being the Menaphos area within the desert. This huge update finally led players to being able to access an area within RuneScape that had been on the map but inaccessible for the past 12 years. Next month, on July 7, 2017, in an update titled Unfinished Business, Jagex announced on RuneScape 3's website that they would be canceling all future RuneScape 3 expansions that had been planned. Instead, they would be backtracking, working on previously unfinished content in the game that was supposed to come out years ago but never did, and they would also begin working on fixing glitches and bugs that had to do with content that had already been out in the game for a long time. 10 days later, on July 17th, Old School RuneScape Mobile was announced to players for the very first time. Everyone was very excited, and the update was originally planned to release in the winter of 2017 this year, but OSRS Mobile didn't actually come out until October in 2018 instead. On July 20th, the Castle Wars minigame was released for free players. They could access the minigame through a portal located at Clan Wars in the desert. On August 20th, RuneScape 3 player Manir Nob became the first free player ever to achieve 200 mil XP in all free-to-play stats. On September 7th, the Fossil Island was released to Old School RuneScape. Next month, on October 9th, the Fletching skill was released to free players within RS3 for the first time ever since its creation in 2002. On October 26th, OSRS received another boss that resided at the top of the Slayer Tower, being the Grotesque Guardians. On November 1st, Jagex launched their first skilling competition within Old School called King of the Skill. King of the Skill is a competition that still seasonally is held today, in which players would have 24 hours time to get as progressed as they possibly can within Old School RuneScape before time runs out. Here is the result of the first King of the Skill competition. On November 23rd, the Mage Arena 2 was released, giving an upgrade to the Magic God capes that had existed in the game ever since 2003. These new versions of capes could also be combined with the Max cape. On November 29, 2017, a video was uploaded by some members of the Old School RuneScape clan Frontline exposing Mod Jed abusing his Jagex moderator powers to help their rival clan Reign of Terror in illegal ways during Old School RuneScape tournaments where real cash was on the line. He had supposedly released IP addresses for DDoS attacks to be committed, and gave Reign of Terror information about updates before they had released, such as the Revenant Caves in the wilderness. Mod Jed was a member of Reign of Terror himself, and he had been rumored to have been doing this as far back as March 2016. On November 30th, the very next morning, Mod Jed was questioned by Jagex Company seniors about these allegations against him. Mod Jed denied everything, saying that the screenshots were faked, and not enough evidence was found to warrant any sort of punishment, and he was let off the hook. On December 1st, Jagex began investigating Mod Jed further, but still ended up concluding that the statements made against him were false, and Jed decided to just officially resign from being a member of the Reign of Terror clan at the time. Further adding to the suspicions taking place around these tournaments at this time, on December 4th, the Deadman Mode seasonal finale had taken place this day, and Reign of Terror lost the tournament after having won the last 6 shortly after Mod Jed resigned from their clan. In the following weeks, the original accusers of Mod Jed, making up a total of 17 members of Frontline, had their accounts hacked and hijacked, and the hijackers would bot on their accounts to get them banned permanently. Their usernames would also be changed to Reign of Terror related terms, so it was clear who was behind this attack. An anonymous Jagex moderator was working with Frontline member Total Terror at the time, and got all of the victims' accounts unbanned however. After this stunt, Jagex once again for a third time investigated any involvement Mod Jed could have had, but he was also once again found not guilty. Mod Jed was officially moved however to the OSRS mobile development team of JMods, where he could do less damage if he was guilty. From there, he would continue to be monitored closely. On January 4th, 2018, Old School RuneScape released an epic quest that was filled with nostalgia along the way of completing it, being Dragon Slayer 2. This is my personal favorite Old School quest, and along with it, the new dragon boss, Vorkath, was released, bringing Ava's Assembler into the game as well. In March of this year, it was confirmed that Old School RuneScape's player count had doubled that of RuneScape 3's.
Hey, Blaine.
On April 5th, Old School RuneScape saw the release of its first ever free-to-play PvP world.
Hey, Blaine.
On April 24th,
Yeah.
Jagex accidentally switched the designated Deadman mode.
I just wanted you to know that
because of this change,
you-
players logged in with their original
you
Old School
kinda-
RuneScape
you-
stats
you,
on this new accidental
suck.
Deadman mode world.
Thanks.
Players began attacking each other immediately. When you die in Deadman mode, your stats are knocked back some levels. Fortunately, only 3 players were ever killed. one of whom was player Deomash, who unintentionally became the first player ever to have an Herblore skill cape with an Herblore level of 98, which is actually kinda cool. On May 3rd, Free-to-Play received their second boss ever, being Briofita, the level 128 Moss Giant boss. On June 7th, the Theater of Blood
I'm not
released
here,
an
I'm
old-school
playing
RuneScape.
Dyson
This
Sphere
activity is
program.
raids-like styled activity, similar to the Chambers of Xerix raids. On July 12th, OSRS player Mazrim Lal posted a thread on Old School RuneScape's Reddit page explaining to everyone that
Thanks,
JackX
Shannon.
had an undiscovered security breach regarding players' accounts. Numerous extremely wealthy high-leveled players at this time were being hacked, despite them all having great account security measures. Mazrim Lal posted this thread after he himself lost 45 billion on his account. The total wealth of all accounts being hacked at this time was worth around 100,000 US dollars. Mazrim Lal would unfortunately be ridiculed and ignored by most players that responded to his Reddit thread, and they called him paranoid or suggested that his account was lacking in security. On the same day, a glitch occurred with the coin pouches that had been added when training the thieving skill. For an unknown reason, when players died with stackable items, those items would turn into max cash on the ground.
Edgeville. I reckon we'll kill him wherever he is. Yes! What?
Because of this major economy-breaking bug, the game was taken offline and Old School RuneScape was rolled back to a previous state for the second time ever in RuneScape history. On the 6th of August 2018, a very sad day occurred in RuneScape's history, and today, it didn't matter if you were an Old School player or a RuneScape 3 player. With heavy hearts, JackX sadly closed RuneScape Classic down forever, deleting the game version off of the RuneScape 3 website. It gave players a notice before doing this, and thousands of players once again for the first time since 2003, 15 years ago, flooded the RuneScape Classic servers for the last time. A RuneScape Classic player by the name of Titus Furious was streaming this event as it happened on Twitch, and to his own surprise, he actually began crying on his stream, stating that he was overwhelmed with all these feelings of nostalgia and sadness at the same time. JackX was absolutely touched by his stream, so much so that they canceled closing Classic down for a little bit, long enough for Titus Furious to complete the final RuneScape Classic quest that was ever made, being the Legends quest. On the very next day, on August 7th, after RuneScape Classic was deleted forever, the entire FunOrb website and all 43 games on it were also deleted permanently. It was during this same month that ModJed had finally been connected to a series of account hijackings. On September 20th, JackX officially fired ModJed and returned several billions to the affected accounts. In the news post, JackX stated that they were working with the police on this investigation and couldn't say much more due to this being an ongoing legal battle. ModJed rigged so many competitions that involved thousands of real-world dollars, and his actions were in direct violation of the Non-Disclosure Agreement Act within the JackX employee contract. All of his crimes of theft equaled up to hundreds of thousands of dollars being stolen. To this day, ModJed's actions have gone down in history as the largest in-house scandal at JackX. On the 9th of October in 2018, JackX proposed a new old-school skill called Warding that was basically all ready to go to be implemented. Warding was going to be a skill that worked with other skills, in which players would use magic to craft items such as armor. A full guide, skill cape, and everything that makes up a skill was almost all finished and ready to be put into the game. However, the yes count on the polls never fully reached 75%, sometimes getting really close too. The skill was eventually scrapped and cancelled in 2019, despite being almost completed in its development, due to JackX being quite sure that it was going to pass in the polls that it had failed in. On October 30th, Old School RuneScape was officially released on mobile devices, and the player base skyrocketed because of this, reaching up to 150,000 players online shortly after mobile's release. By the end of this year, Old School RuneScape's player count was 4 times that of RuneScape 3. "2019 opened up in RuneScape 3 with a complete rework of the mining and smithing skill. Both skills were reworked to be more useful and profitable, and they became more interesting to level up. All of the level requirements were changed so that they made sense as well. For example, you used to require level 85 smithing to smith rune armor, but it was now changed to where you could make rune armor if you had level 50 smithing instead. The content didn't stop at level 50 smithing though, as 4 brand new armor tiers had been added to level 60, 70, 80, and 90. Within the mining skill, rocks had been changed to where they no longer depleted, and players could mine rocks together from now on. You could now mine completely AFK if you wanted to, but if you were paying attention while mining, you could take advantage of some perk mechanics that had been implemented within the skill that AFK players wouldn't be utilizing. For a long time before this update, mining and smithing hadn't really evolved with the rest of the RuneScape 3 game version over the years, so this update was pretty exciting for RuneScape 3 players. On January 10th, over in old school RuneScape, the Kebos Lowlands received way more content on the continent of Zaya. This addition to the continent brought a new Slayer Master named Konar. Konar resides on the top of Karulm's Slayer dungeon underneath Mount Karulm. If you received a Slayer task from her while killing the monster she had assigned you, you might receive a drop called the Brimstone Key. This key could unlock the Brimstone chest near her, giving the player additional items after their Slayer task was complete. The Kebos Lowlands also brought a new boss to old school RuneScape underneath Mount Karulm called the Alchemical Hydra. And lastly, the Lowlands received another addition, being a guild associated with the farming skill. Within the farming guild, players could take advantage of its many features, including extra farming patches, all new seeds with abilities for patch growths, and they could fight a new demi-boss monster called Hispori for 12,000 farming XP as well. All of these new updates weren't perfect though, and there was one major bug that had caused RuneScape's third ever rollback in RuneScape history. For an unknown reason, the fifth most valuable item in all of old school RuneScape, a twisted bow, spawned on a specific ground tile near the farming guild. The word got out rather quickly, and players rushed to this spot to obtain the bow. Hundreds of billionaires were made in an instant, and it was never fully confirmed by Jagex just how many twisted bows entered the game. This bug would have damaged RuneScape's economy catastrophically. Because of this, all of OSRS was turned offline completely for 2 hours. The bug was fixed, and Jagex rolled back the servers to a time before the bug had entered the game, and all the twisted bows were confiscated. On the 7th of March within OSRS, the special attack orb became clickable as well for all weapons that had a special attack. On April 10th, Jagex announced that they would begin hiding poll results from players who vote in polls within old school RuneScape. Polling updates is a fundamental part of what makes old school RuneScape great. Old School's very existence was decided by a poll back in February of 2013. In the 6 years prior to this update that have followed, polling had been pivotal in shaping the game, as only updates 75% voted for by the majority of players within the game pass. However, it started becoming clear that the current polling system of this time was not working anymore for the vast majority of the OSRS community. Content, which would benefit smaller groups of players, often suffered in the polls, despite the fact that this content would have had minimal impact on the wider player base. Plus, only a very small group of players were actively voting at this time, despite the community growing hugely within the past 18 months. What this essentially meant was that a small portion of the community were the ones deciding the content for the majority of players. This was never supposed to happen, and the other reasons behind this decision to begin hiding poll results are pretty complex. After this update, poll results only became visible after polls for updates had ended. Polling is still an issue today, and it is still an ongoing development by Jagex. On May 13, 2019, Jagex had released a development blog titled The New Player Experience. Jagex had began studying how legitimate new players had been operating within the game. The learning curve of the game can be pretty steep, and it was found that most new players were dropping out before they even got to experience the real game. Because of this, Jagex implemented some things around RuneScape that new players could take advantage of within their first few hours of playing. These things would include tasks for players to follow to get them better acquainted with how the game works, if they had chosen an option that they were completely new when they registered. On June 20th, Laren's keys were added to the Slayer Master Crystelia's tasks. Much like the Brimstone keys, you could use these Laren's keys to unlock chests in the wilderness that would give you the same rewards as the Brimstone chest would, only in greater quantity due to the dangerous locations that these chests were in. On July 4th, the Forthos dungeon was released, giving Old School a new level 318 boss, being Sarachnis the Spider. On July 25th, the Song of the Elves quest was released, which also added the elven city Prifdinus to Old School RuneScape, a city that had only existed in RuneScape 3 up until this point, but had always been on the Old School map. On August 29th, the PvP minigame Last Man Standing received an entire revamp. Players could now choose their loadouts before playing the minigame, and a point system was added to be spent in a shop for rewards. On September 12th, all house portals in the game received an advertisement board near them where players could advertise their open player-owned house more efficiently than just spamming. On September 26th, the Fremennik Exiles quest was released, furthering the Fremennik lore in the north. On November 14th, Jagex announced another game mode that was added to OSRS called the Twisted League. In this game mode, players would play on an Ironman account that was restricted to the Kebos Lowlands and Karend on the continent of Zaya, and the game mode would also receive its own section of high scores on the OSRS website with all the other modes. This year ended with a RuneScape YouTuber named Rendy uploading a shocking video to his channel on November 26th. exposing a major economy-breaking bug that a few people were taking advantage of, and few people to this day still don't know about, because it was attempted to be hidden. Essentially, these few people were having 2,000 accounts that they owned fill up a game world and crash it. This would create a 15-minute rollback within Jagex's systems on the specific world that they had crashed. During this 15-minute window, players would trade max cash between 4 different accounts, and then the world would crash. When the world went back online, those 4 accounts were discovered to have been rolled back by 15 minutes, but still would have the cash that they had traded amongst themselves. It was later confirmed that at least 110 billion coins were duplicated using this method. Within Rendy's video, he shows that he attempted to contact Jagex numerous times about this game-breaking bug, but got no real response consisting of a plan of action. Ex-Jagex moderator Mod Ronan even commented on this video using his personal YouTube channel Goody, saying, "If only you knew how bad things really are," which is kinda scary. Most of these 2,000 accounts were later banned, but the game was never officially rolled back. Jagex supposedly was rumored to have tracked down the rest of the duplicated gold, but even I'm unsure if this was ever confirmed. This bug was never discussed again by Jagex. On January 9th of this year, Old School RuneScape received an update where you could now wield armor and eat food while your bank screen was up. On January 23rd, the Wikipedia website had been integrated with the Old School RuneScape game client. Players could now use the Wikipedia by clicking on the wiki icon near the minimap. On February 6th, OSRS received a new level 814 boss monster called the Nightmare. On March 5th, the game was updated to where hit splats that weren't your own were now tinted to a darker shade to avoid confusion when it came to what you were hitting on the attacked monster. Over in RuneScape 3, on the 30th of March, the game had received its 28th skill, being Archaeology. Less than a week later, RuneScape 3 player Lemmy became the first one ever to 99 Archaeology. He would continue on to dominate the high scores by also being the first player to achieve level 120 Archaeology, as well as being the first to 200 million experience in the skill too. Today, Lemmy is still rank 1 overall in RuneScape 3 and always will be until another new skill releases. In the same month, on March 28th, Jagex posted a company announcement both on RS3 and OSRS websites, stating that Jagex as a business had been purchased for $530 million by MacArthur Fortune Holding LLC, a US-based global asset management firm. Still to this day, MacArthur Fortune Holding believes that there is a lot of potential in RuneScape, but whether that comes in the form of new content or just new forms of monetization will only become clear with time. On June 4th, a glitch within Old School RuneScape occurred after the release of Darkmire, along with its associated quest, Sins of the Father. Shortly after this content released, players began reporting issues with their items disappearing and being replaced by other items. Jagex acknowledged the bug 10 minutes after it was discovered, and then initiated a 4th ever server rollback to the game, reverting player data to a state before the update and glitch had happened. Next month, on July 16th, the Ferox Enclave was released in the wilderness in OSRS. The Ferox Enclave is a safe-zoned area that was placed in the middle of the wilderness. When this update came out, clan wars and last man standing had existed within the desert but were removed and placed here within the Ferox Enclave in the wilderness instead. The Ferox Enclave also contains a portal to Castle Wars as well as Death's new office, a room where your items would now go when you die. Any items over 100,000 coins would require a specific fee based on the item values that you had lost upon death. In addition to Death's new office, further death mechanics were updated. You would now drop a gravestone where you had died that you could see on the minimap, and players would have 15 minutes to reclaim their items now after dying as well before any of the leftover items would be transported to Death's office. On September 9th, Jagex released a new members quest called A Poor Scene of Interest, a quest that was designed to introduce new players to the Slayer skill. This quest added a new Slayer Master called Spria that is located in Draenor, as well as a new low-leveled monster called the Sour Hog. All of this history brings us to today. Currently, it's only the 3rd month of the year 2021. It wouldn't have felt right to include 2021 in this video yet since we still have 9 months left to go, which is why the timeline only goes to 2020. First and foremost, thank you all for watching. I hope that this was quite a journey for everyone. While it may have only been a 2.5-hour journey for you, I actually announced on my Twitter that I had started working on this video last year back on August 6th during 2020. It's been an 8-month journey for me, and it has been filled with so many emotions. I've learned so much that I never knew about RuneScape, the RuneScape players community, and Jagex as a company. I started this game in 2004, 17 years ago, at the age of 10.